Hello everyone, I am Sleepy Shoreline and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to sleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Now relax and unwind.
I spend a lot of my spare nights doing deliveries for DoorDash. It's my way of getting extra money while also not needing to commit to a more strict second job. I started driving around 9 p.m. on this night and steadily took on some orders until 11, where it slowed down a bit. During this time, I just drove around the shopping center that had most of the fast food restaurants people often ordered from, and eventually another order came through. It was a regular order to be delivered about 4 miles away. After getting the food, I started the directions to the address, and it was almost immediately apparent that it wasn't a house. I scrolled in on the map, which only showed streets and buildings, and the address it pointed to was along a street that had no buildings on it. It looked kind of like an empty plot of land, but the DoorDash map was never that great, so I just started driving and decided to at least check it out and maybe call the customer if there was an issue. I drove out, taking just under 20 minutes until I reached the street it was on. This street was very bare. No houses or crossroads, and no cars driving on it. When I got to the end, it became a gravel road, and on the side was a small wooden sign that was too weathered to be legible. I pulled onto the gravel and turned my brights on, and right away I could see something far off down the road. I drove in closer, and as I approached it, my phone dinged to let me know that I'd arrived. In my headlights was a small mobile home, or some kind of RV, and on the door were poorly painted numbers. I looked back at my phone. 2760. It was the address. I got out, holding the food in my hand as I walked up to the RV. Getting closer, it was a bit unsettling to look at. It was overgrown and old, which was strange considering it was a mobile home meant to be moving around. I gave it a knock and waited. This was a rare cash order, which made more sense once I saw the place, but it definitely didn't make me feel good having to stand here. As I looked around, an eerie feeling loomed over me. This place was surrounded by the woods with no lights anywhere. Past the RV, it was complete darkness. I heard something from inside, and I prepared for them to open the door, but then a voice to my right startled me. I looked over and saw a man smiling at me, standing by the corner of the RV. He asked if I had his order, and I nodded, apologizing and walking it over to him. I handed it off and said his total. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill, then smiled again and said he just needed to grab the rest. He turned and walked back around the RV while I stayed where I was. This whole interaction in writing doesn't seem as off as it was in person, but I can tell you there was something very wrong about this guy. It was just something about the way he acted and said everything that gave me chills. I waited for a minute or so before getting more nervous and looking around the corner to see where he went. In the distance, I saw a figure standing by what looked like the dark outline of a shed. They were not walking, they were just standing there. As the fear grew inside me, my head jolted around, hearing the door to the RV opening. A different man looked out at me, and just as I started to greet him, he slammed the door shut. My heartbeat now intensifying, I looked back out at the man who was by the shed. He was now walking back toward the RV, but had something else in his hands. In the moment, I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it was either a long bat or a rifle. I ran back to the car, getting in and turning it on with shaky hands as I put it in reverse. The man came around the side of the mobile home and stood calmly in the darkness as I drove off. I don't know what happened there, but I wasn't exactly keen on finding out. I went straight home afterwards and debated calling 911, but was caught up on the fact that I didn't actually know what was going on. In the end, I made the regretful decision not to notify the police. Whatever happened that night will remain as just the strange encounter it was, with no answers to the true nature of it. I work at a 24-hour drive-thru restaurant, and this had happened only a few weeks ago. I'm a crew manager, but for the most part, I just do the same things everyone else does, which is cook and take orders. For overnight hours, we always have at least 2 people, one being a manager and the other usually being a cook. On this night, the cook had called in sick, and when I called the others to see if they could cover his shift, none of them said they could. So by 12 a.m., I was the only worker there. Now usually the restaurant doesn't get busy overnight, and more employees come in at 4 a.m., so it wasn't an entire shift alone, but it still meant that for 4 hours, I had to do everything myself. I left my headset on in case someone came to the drive-thru, then started working on the tasks I had for the night. I started by scraping and cleaning the stovetops, but a few minutes in, I was interrupted by a banging sound from the front of the restaurant. I walked down and looked over the counter, seeing a man standing at the front door and banging on it. Then he pressed his face against the glass and looked inside, scanning the whole room before his eyes set on me. I walked over to the door as he stared at me, and when I got closer, he backed up and waited like he thought I was going to open it. I yelled through the glass that our dine-in area was closed and that he needed to use the drive-thru if he wanted to order something. He looked confused, so I yelled again that the doors were locked and he had to use the drive-thru. He showed no response that time, not giving me any idea whether he understood me or not, so I just turned around and walked back to the kitchen. I figured he'd have to get the hint at some point that the doors weren't opening. I continued working on the stovetops, spending at least 15 to 20 minutes on them. Throughout this time, I had gone once to check the front to see if the man had left, and from what I could see, he was gone. The whole parking lot was empty, and the man was not at the door. But it was a couple minutes after finishing with the stoves that I got an alert from my headset that someone was in the drive-thru. I turned on my mic and asked for their order while walking to the window, but nobody said anything. When I got to the window, I immediately saw in the camera that there wasn't a car out there. I looked around the screen and didn't see any movement either, so I ignored it and started walking back. But as I got to the back room, I slowed to a stop when I thought I heard something. I stood in place and listened as footsteps slowly walked above me on the roof of the building. They were careful steps, not making much sound aside from the roof creaking, but I had no doubt that there was someone up there. I followed the sound of their steps with my stare, moving down the ceiling until I saw the ladder leading to the maintenance hatch, and that's when I realized what they were doing. I sprinted over to the ladder and started looking for some sort of lock to keep the hatch from opening, but I'd never even used it, so I had no clue how it worked or if it even locked. Then there was a loud creak from the ceiling directly above me, and a few thuds came from the outside of the hatch. A moment passed, then the hatch creaked open slightly, and through the small gap, all I saw were a set of eyes staring back at me. I sprinted for the front of the building, hearing loud thuds from where the hatch was as I quickly unlocked the door and ran for my car. I called the police as I sat inside and frantically looked through the windows of the restaurant. While on the phone, I saw a shadow moving by the front counter. Then a man appeared, standing in the far back of the restaurant, but was looking in my direction. After a moment, he turned and disappeared behind the kitchen, leaving me in a panic until the police made it. They searched inside and outside, going on the roof as well, but the man had already run off. Nothing from the place was missing either. No equipment or money was taken. Nothing. He just broke in and left. I tried to not think about it too much, but it's hard not to come to the conclusion that he was there for me. Like I said, This happened pretty recently, so there's still not much of an update on it. Even with his face on the cameras, there's yet to be a confirmed identity. The owner of the building added a padlock to the inside of the hatch though, which should have been done before, but I guess it was just an inconvenience. I still worry about the man's intentions, and if he could be watching for me to be alone again, waiting to do whatever it was he tried before. Over the last 5 years, I've been working at different odd jobs all around the country. I live in a van, so I move around a lot, but a few months out of the year, I have to stay in an area for an extended amount of time in order to rack up some cash before moving on. At this time, I was staying in the mid-east portion of Utah, and I'd taken up a job at a gas station. It was located on a road that was really only used by locals to go in and out of state without having to deal with the highway traffic. There was nothing else on this route. It was simply a road with a lone gas station for the occasional driver to fill up at. That's kind of why it was perfect for me though, because the location of it didn't matter. Since I lived in a van, I could easily stay out there for an extended amount of time and work. Anyway, I'd been there for a bit over a month, and up to this point, I was still working random shifts. This day I was working 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It was really not a special night by any means. No customers aside from a few stopping by the pumps, and not much to do as far as stocking or anything. I was mostly standing around on my phone, or pacing around the store and making the shelves look nice. Then at 1 a.m., a customer pulled into the station, parking in one of the few spaces right in front of the door. Knowing they must be coming inside, I went back to the counter. A man got out and came into the shop, looking over and smiling at me, then giving me a nod as he turned down one of the aisles. He started whistling as he looked at a couple things, picking them up and putting them back, then continuing down the aisle and repeating this. I wasn't sure if he was just taking a break from driving, or if he actually needed something, but the items he was picking up and looking at were all different, and he didn't actually seem interested in buying them. Then he abruptly stopped whistling, walked over to the door, and left. I didn't think he stole anything, but it was strange. He got into his car and started moving around, reaching into his back seat before getting back out of his car and coming into the shop again. After seeing that, I wasn't feeling too comfortable. This seemed almost exactly how I thought an armed robbery would begin like, but the aggression I was expecting when he came back in didn't happen. He walked over to the counter and asked how my night was, starting a quick back and forth of small talk. I acted as normal as I could, just in case I was overthinking everything. But then he asked if I could help him with his car. He said his tires needed air and that he didn't see any pumps outside. This station didn't have any air pumps for self-use, but we did carry a handheld air compressor for emergency situations. I got it out and followed him to his car. He pointed down at the tire that needed it, and I ducked down, putting the compressor line in. I had it in for less than 10 seconds before it read the pressure to be at the right level. I looked over at the man, seeing him looking down at me with no expression. I took everything out and stood up, starting to walk back to the shop when he stopped me by rushing in front of the door. His right hand was deep inside his jacket pocket as he stared at me with a cold face. I told him to move, but of course he stayed in front of the door, though I could see it in his eyes that he was preparing to do something. I took a step back, trying to say what I could to calm the intensity of the situation, but just as I thought he was going to snap, he suddenly ran around me and got in his car, pulling out aggressively and speeding away. I took this time to go inside and call 911, and surprisingly, they arrived out here only minutes later. They were already on the chase, looking for the exact car the man was driving. The officers stated the man was on the run from a recently committed crime near the border. They didn't give me any details, but the way they said it made me think it wasn't just some small robbery. After my quick statement, they got on the road again, and after that, I never got an update. I tried to look up recent crimes and everything, but could not find anything useful. I don't know what he was planning to do, or why he actually stopped at the station, but my best guess could have been to steal my van and conceal his tracks, or at least delay them. However, depending on what crime he had just committed, I think my life could have easily been at risk, and why he chose not to do anything to me is unknown.
I'm a teacher, and this is something that happened a couple of years ago. It was during my 4th year teaching at the high school that I still currently teach at. I teach math, and had 4 different classes throughout the day that semester. It kept me very busy between teaching, preparing lessons, and grading assignments. One day, about a month into the school year, I was teaching like any other. It was the first hour of the day, and I was in the middle of going through a problem on the whiteboard. That's when the phone rang in my classroom. I paused what I was doing and walked over to answer it. I was told the school was being locked down, but I wasn't told why. After that, the announcement came over the entire school intercom. Some of the kids in class started to talk and asked me what the cause of the lockdown was. I honestly didn't know, and I told them that. I did what I was supposed to do and turned out the lights and locked the doors. I instructed the students to the back of the classroom. There were 20 kids in my class, and they all did what I said, but still wanted to know why we were in a lockdown. I knew this was not a drill, and I was pretty curious myself. I went to my desk and sat down in the chair. Then we all just waited. Minutes went by, which felt like forever. After about 10 minutes, my cell phone started vibrating. It was on top of my desk, and I picked it up to see who was calling me. It was a number that I didn't recognize. I was about to let it ring, but I thought it was possibly information about the lockdown. It may have been from another teacher whose number I didn't have yet. It could have been from another staff member as well. That's what was going through my mind in the moment. At the last minute, I accepted the call. I held the phone up to my ear and listened as I heard a man start to speak. I didn't really recognize his voice. He spoke professionally and told me that I was needed in the principal's office immediately. I asked why, and I was told that it would be discussed when I got there. I was very confused. I said I couldn't leave my class, and I was told that I needed to go anyways. Then he hung up. I saw my students looking at me, no doubt wondering what I was told on the phone. Then one of them spoke up and asked. I told them the truth and said somebody asked me to the principal's, and I really didn't know why. I was debating whether I should go or not. I got up from my desk and walked over to the door. Then I looked out the window and into the hallway. It was very empty. But then I saw someone. It was sort of far to the left, just barely in my sight. There was a man standing there wearing all black, including a ski mask. I quickly moved back after seeing him. One of the students asked me if I was going to go, and I said no, I wasn't. I told everyone to stay at the back of the class, and I joined them. I had no clue who the person in the hallway was, but the fact that they were wearing a ski mask could not be good. They were likely the reason for the lockdown. I didn't want my students to know that the person was so close, though. Things were very silent for a few minutes. We couldn't hear anything from out in the hallways. It felt like forever, and the more time that went by, the more worried I became. I got another phone call on my phone from the same number, but I ignored it. They called back again, and at that point, I turned off my phone entirely. We all waited in the classroom for almost an hour. Finally, I got another call on my phone in the classroom. I walked over and picked it up. I was told that the lockdown was over, and then there was an announcement over the intercom letting us know. Class was over, and I let the students out. When I found out more details from the lockdown, I couldn't believe it. The person in the ski mask was a former student of our high school. He was also a former student of mine, who I had failed. He came back to the school, and he was the one who called me on my cell phone as well. I'm not sure how he got my number, but he did. He was trying to get me out of my classroom. I'm not sure what he was planning to do then, possibly attack me. I don't want to think about that. Luckily, he was spotted by a faculty member, which sent the school into a lockdown. Eventually, the police came and were able to locate the suspect and catch him, although he was able to evade them for quite a while. I still can't believe it, even to this day. I can't imagine what would have happened had I left the classroom. It was too strange though, and I never really seriously considered it. I could tell that something was really suspicious. Still, I will never forget seeing him in the hallway. It was one of the scariest sights of my life. This happened when I was in high school. For some detail, I'm a female and was a junior at the time this took place. I used to walk to school and back every day because I lived pretty close to the school. So it would usually take me around 10 to 15 minutes to walk there, and I would take sidewalks basically the entire way. One morning, I left when I usually did at about 7:30 a.m. because school started at 7:50. After walking out the front door and leaving my house with my backpack, I saw a car on the side of the street. It was right in front of the sidewalk where I would walk past. I had never seen it before, so I didn't know who it was. I planned to just go right past it, but when I did, I saw the passenger side window rolling down. Somebody said something, and I looked over. The car was an older dark gray BMW, and the driver was a young-looking guy, but seemed to be a little bit older than me. He then asked me if I needed a ride to school. I had never seen this guy before, and didn't think that he even went to my school. He told me his name was, I think, Ryan, but I can't remember exactly. He said which school he went to, which happened to be a school in the next city over. Then he said that he was good friends with Erica, who happened to be one of my best friends. Apparently, he was going to pick her up, and she asked him to pick me up as well and give us both rides to school. I said no thanks. I had never heard Erica talk about this guy before, and it just seemed really weird. The guy asked me why not, and I said maybe some other time. I wanted to confirm with Erica if she knew this guy at all. I figured there was a chance that she was friends with him, but she hadn't said anything to me about this. Obviously, it was a little bit suspicious. The guy seemed disappointed, but ultimately said okay. I kept walking down the street as he pulled away in his car and drove past me. But right when he got past me, he stopped his car on the road. He rolled down his window again and said, "Last chance." I said no again, and then he finally drove off. I walked the rest of the way to school and got there at basically my normal time. As I was walking, I texted Erica about it. In that semester of high school, my first hour class was English. By the time I got to class, I had gotten a response from Erica. I usually didn't get to see her before school because our first hour classes were on the opposite ends of the school from each other. She said that she didn't even know who I was talking about. I had a feeling that's what she was going to say. This was a mystery to me of who this guy really was and why he tried to pick me up in his car. He knew that I had a friend named Erica, and he also knew where I went to school, but I didn't know him at all. During that same first hour English class, probably about 30 minutes in, the school went into a lockdown. I had no clue what it was for at the time. We had never had a lockdown before in my entire time at the school, just a few drills. We were all told to sit at the back of the class. The classroom lights were turned off, and the door was locked by our teacher. We all sat in mostly silence for what felt like a really long time. It didn't really last that long though, it was probably about 20 minutes. Eventually, the lockdown was lifted. By that time, we were all very curious as to what was going on. By the end of the day, I had found out. A man apparently walked into the school after class had started and right past the receptionist. The only door that was open after class started was the front door. He was then spotted by a hall monitor who asked him for a pass. The guy walked past him without saying anything and went to the locker commons. Then he hid there, and the school was locked down. Unfortunately, the guy ran out from the locker commons to the nearest exit and was able to get out. The school and property was searched, but he had gotten away. It was good that he was gone, but it was also bad that he wasn't caught. Some of us were wondering where he went, but it could have been anywhere. There was large woods behind our school, and I think they pretty much gave up on the search when they found out he wasn't on the school property anymore. Still, I had no clue who the guy was who had been inside the school. I didn't even connect the dots at all. After school that day, I walked home like I always did. I was less than halfway there when I once again saw the car that was at my house earlier. I got a bad feeling. This guy was not who he claimed to be, and I knew that. The car was parked on the side of the road again, on the side that I had to walk past. I sped up and started walking faster, but when I got even with the car, once again I heard him say something. His window was already down, and the guy said hi. I looked over and said hi, all while continuing to walk. He then told me to stop. I didn't and ignored him. Then he said, "You know I was in your school earlier." I stopped and couldn't believe what I was hearing. He then started to laugh, and it was really creepy. He basically bragged about how they had locked the school down, and he managed to escape. As he was saying this, he opened his car door and got out. I walked even faster until the guy started to run. Then, at that point, I had to start running too. Unfortunately, it seemed as though he was a little bit faster than I was. I could tell that he was gaining on me. I left the sidewalk and ran out into the middle of the road. Then came possibly one of the luckiest moments of my entire life. A car started driving down that otherwise quiet road. I ran straight for the car. When I got close, noticed that it was somebody that I actually knew. It was one of my classmates, a guy named Matt. He saw me and stopped his car. I ran for the passenger side, while the man chasing me continued to come after me and was about 20 feet back. I got inside of Matt's car and told him to lock the doors. The guy chasing reached the car moments later. The doors locked, and the guy tried getting in and then began pounding on the door when he couldn't. Matt asked me who this guy was, and I told him to just get out of there. He drove away, with the guy standing in the street. I explained to Matt as I got out my phone to call the police. I told them everything, and Matt dropped me off at my house a short time later. The police came out and talked with me and my parents, and said that they would look out for the car that I described. That same day, the man was located by the police. He had been stalking me for several days without me even knowing. I'm not sure exactly why he went into our school. Maybe he was waiting for me to get back to my locker. He could have honestly passed for a student because he looked young, but he was actually in his mid-20s and not a student at all. This was years ago now, but I still remember it all the time. I'm really glad Matt was driving by when he did. I don't know what would have happened to me if not. One day, I was in school for a seemingly average Thursday. I was a senior in high school and in my third-hour history class. This was one of my favorite classes because the teacher was really cool. For this story, I'll just call him Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith was very laid back and would give us a lot of time to do homework in class. We would rarely have any actual homework because we could get it all done before we left. He would teach for a bit in the beginning, and then the end of class would pretty much be like study hall. We could talk and get work done. He would even let us go on our phones or listen to music as we worked. So on this day, it was a normal class period. I often had my headphones in as I studied, and I did on this day. We were working on our assignment, and I got done early. I would joke around with Mr. Smith sometimes, as did other students. I remember that I went up to him to turn in my assignment, and he asked me if I wanted to do him a favor. He said that he had to give back some iPads to another teacher. We had used them the previous day for a group assignment thing. There were about 10 iPads in this carrying case. I was happy to do this because it was something to do to get out of class. He wrote me a pass and I took the iPad case. It was supposed to go to a teacher's classroom that was a little ways away. I left the classroom with my headphones still in and I unpaused my music. Then I started walking through the empty hallways to the other teacher's classroom. At this point, there was probably about 15 minutes left of class. Soon, I reached the classroom that I was supposed to go to. I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I could see in the window as well that all of the lights were off. I found this a bit odd, but quickly figured that the teacher wasn't there. She probably didn't teach a class during this hour or something. I turned around and started to head back to my classroom. I walked about halfway back when I saw something up ahead. There was a spot where two hallways intersected a ways up. I saw a man up ahead who I didn't recognize. He clearly wasn't a teacher, and I didn't think he worked at the school either. It struck me as suspicious right away. I only saw him for about a second or two because he passed by one hallway and into the other. He didn't look in my direction at all. The problem was that he was walking in the direction that my classroom was in. I kept walking up ahead, and when I got to where the man had walked past, I stopped and looked down the hallway first. When I did, I saw the guy again. He was a long ways down, near where my classroom was. It appeared as though he was looking for something. I didn't want to go down there, and I started walking in the opposite direction. I took out my headphones at that point. Everything was silent. I didn't really know where I was going anymore, and I was trying to figure out what exactly was going on. After walking around the empty hallways for like 5 minutes, I thought maybe the man was gone by then, and I started heading back for my class. When I got back to the hallway where I had last seen him, he was gone. I was just glad to see this, and I started walking down the hallway for my class. Just a few steps later, though, I heard footsteps coming from behind me and around the corner. They were going towards me, and there were some bathrooms right there, so I just went inside. I didn't know who the person was, but I really didn't want them to see me. By now, I figured that they weren't supposed to be in the school. After going inside of the bathroom, at first, I just waited inside. But when the footsteps got closer, I moved into one of the stalls. The guy passed by and did not go inside. I waited a little while longer before looking out of the bathroom. When I did, I saw that the person was a ways down the hallway, once again near where my class was. I left the bathroom and quickly tried to walk to the other hallway away from this guy. I must have been loud or something when I did, because as I was walking, I heard movement behind me. I looked and saw the guy looking right at me. He turned and started walking in my direction. The guy was really far behind me, at least over 100 feet. I walked as quickly as possible out of that hallway and took another one. By this point, I just wanted to get out of the school or far away from the guy. I walked down that hallway for a while and then took a left to another one. I was going to the stairs to go down to the first floor. As I approached the stairs though, I heard somebody coming up the stairs. I stopped and didn't know who this person could be. When they came into view, I saw that it was a police officer. He asked me what I was doing, and I asked him what was going on. He told me that the school was under a lockdown, and they were searching for a suspicious man. I pointed him in the direction that I had last seen him. Then I went downstairs and saw several more officers. I showed them my student ID, and we found a nearby classroom, and I had to wait inside there until the lockdown was over. It lasted for probably about 15 more minutes, and then it ended. We were let out, and by then, it was time for the next class period. I'm not sure who that guy was, or what he was even doing. I also don't know how he got into our school either. I hadn't been able to hear that we were going into lockdown though, because my headphones were in, and I couldn't hear anything. Looking back, if I would have known, I would have tried to go into any classroom. I don't know what would have happened to me if that guy caught up with me either, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. Alright, so picture this. I'm called in as a substitute teacher for a class that missed out on a field trip. The regular teacher and most of the students were out on the field trip, while I was left in charge of 4 students who didn't have their parent permission slips signed. To set the scene, I had just finished subbing for another class. Afterwards, I was asked to sub for this class, and the instructions were pretty straightforward. Play a Mythbusters video for the students, and hand out worksheets to keep them occupied. Sounds easy, right? Well, here's where things took an unexpected turn. Barely a few minutes into class with the video playing, the Fab Four, who seemed to be inseparable buddies, all raised their hands and requested to go to the bathroom. Now, being the laid-back sub that I am, I granted their wish, with a friendly reminder to return soon so we could finish the video together. They nodded eagerly, promising to be back in a jiffy, and headed out to the hallway as I paused the video. As I waited for them to return, a couple of minutes went by. Then, I heard a noise come over the intercom. There was an announcement that the school was now going into lockdown, and this was not a drill. This put me in a little bit of an odd situation. Panic started to settle in as I realized that these 4 kids were nowhere to be seen. Should I go out and search for them? Or should I stick to the lockdown protocols and secure the classroom by locking the doors and turning off the lights? I figured my students should be back any second, and I stood there in my classroom doorway for about another minute or so. In a moment of concern for their well-being, I chose to go find them. I figured they must be hanging out in the nearest bathroom, right? Easy to find, or so I thought. I hurriedly made my way to the hallway, fueled by a mix of worry and determination. I walked to the bathroom as quickly as I could, and I got winded because I'm severely not in shape like I used to be. I pushed open the bathroom door and knocked. I was hoping to find them and usher them back to the classroom. "Hey guys, we're on lockdown. You need to come back to the classroom," I called out, my voice echoing through the empty bathroom. But to my surprise, there was no response, not a peep. As confusion grew, I cautiously pushed the bathroom door open wider, half expecting them to jump out. But that wasn't the case. The bathroom was empty. Not a single person in sight. My heart sank. Where on earth did these students go? I couldn't dwell on it for long though, because my priority was to get back to my classroom. If the students had wandered off, then that was their fault. They would likely be found by another faculty member. With a mix of anxiety and haste, I retraced my steps, making my way back to the classroom that I was in charge of. I went inside and remained by the door. 10 long minutes went by, which felt like a whole hour, and still there was no sign of my students. Just when I was about to lose my cool from all the suspense, I heard this weird noise coming from inside the classroom. I quickly scanned the room, hoping to figure out where it was coming from. But there was nothing there, just an empty and super quiet classroom. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again. This time, my eyes locked onto this person crouched behind a desk at the back of the room. I cautiously approached, my voice trembling when I asked, "Who's there?" I was praying it was just a student playing an elaborate prank, but to my dismay, the figure that rose up from beyond the desk was no student. It was a man, a complete stranger, and certainly not a student. I freaked out and sprinted out of the classroom immediately, desperate to find help. Now, as a grown adult, you're probably wondering why I bolted and didn't stay in the room and fight him. Well, like I said, I'm not as young as I used to be, and I'm not in shape, so the odds of me winning a fight protecting myself are like 4 out of 10. I pounded on the door of the nearest classroom, and thankfully, the teacher opened the door. Their expression quickly turned to concern as they listened to my explanation of what had happened. Without wasting a second, they dialed the school principal and alerted her about the new situation. Soon enough, the school became filled with activity as police officers were everywhere in the hallways. It turned out that the stranger I had encountered was the very person the school had been locked down for. He must have snuck into my classroom when I was down the hall looking for my students. This realization made my mind go black as I thought about all the possibilities that could have happened if I didn't run away from my classroom. It turned out that the missing students had taken refuge in another teacher's classroom. Nobody had thought to inform me though. Rumors began to circulate that this intruder had ulterior motives, with whispers of him searching for someone specific or possibly carrying a weapon. The details remained vague, and the school kept the information tightly under wraps. Looking back on that day, I'm just grateful that everybody was okay. After that crazy incident, I needed some serious time off. When I finally went back to teaching, I had a whole new perspective. I will certainly never forget that day. This happened when I was 15 years old and a sophomore in high school. I was hanging out with a couple of friends before school started. We were just standing around talking about dumb stuff that 15-year-olds do. Soon, the warning bell rang, and we had to go our separate ways to attend our classes. I took my time heading to my class because my teacher, Coach Thompson, was pretty laid back and didn't mind if I was a bit late. He usually started class a few minutes late anyways, because he was also a sports coach and was always busy with that stuff. As I made my way to class, the school bell rang again. School was now starting, and I would be late, but I didn't think much of it and kept walking. The hallways were now empty. The intercom came back on, and there was an announcement that the school was going under a lockdown. I couldn't understand why. I was pretty confused. Everything seemed fine to me. I kept walking towards my classroom, thinking it might be a false alarm or a drill. When I entered the hallway where my classroom was located, I stopped and froze. At the far end of the hallway, there was a large man wearing a ski mask and all black. He also had combat boots on and a huge black duffel bag around his shoulder. It took me a few seconds to process what was happening. The man in the ski mask hadn't noticed me yet, but then he turned his head and looked in my direction. I quickly ducked back around the corner, scared out of my mind. He had been standing right where my classroom was, so I couldn't go there now. The hallways were completely empty, and I started to panic. I knew the school pretty well, as I'd been there plenty of times prior to my sophomore year, so I went to the nearest place I knew, which was a nearby bathroom. I was hoping to stay safe in there until everything was over. I sat in a bathroom stall, trying to listen for any sounds, praying that the man wouldn't come inside. During the time in there, I was terrified, and I didn't dare make a noise. I stayed in the bathroom, trying to calm myself down from hyperventilating. For maybe around 30 minutes, I was in there. It was completely quiet, and I couldn't hear much. But at one point, I did hear footsteps, and it really freaked me out. I really don't know who it was, but luckily, they moved past where I was, and then things went back to being silent. I just hoped whoever that guy I had seen was would not enter the bathroom. Finally, I decided that I would leave. I hadn't heard anything in the longest time. I thought it might be safer to get out of there, and I stepped out. When I did, I noticed the hallways were still empty and quiet. The lockdown was still in effect, and I had no idea what was happening. I cautiously started speed walking back towards my classroom, and I was very careful looking all around. I had made it about halfway back when I suddenly heard a noise that made me freeze. It was the sound of footsteps getting closer from the next hallway around the corner. It was happening all over again. I could feel the sinking feeling of the fear and the shock once more. I quickly turned around and went back down another hallway, trying to avoid whoever was coming my way. I glanced back for a split second and saw the man in the ski mask starting to come around the corner. In this point in time, I swear I could have ran a 4.3 flat in the 40-yard dash. For once in my life, I was genuinely running for my life, and nothing else mattered besides that. It was a weird feeling. I didn't care about anything, not girls I had crushes on, not my homework, not even my job. All I cared about was staying alive for myself. I kept on running. Eventually, I stopped, unable to hear the man behind me anymore. I gathered myself and started walking towards the exit, hoping to find a way out. When I reached the exit, relief flooded over me as I saw multiple police officers outside the school. I ran for the door, and when they saw me, they waved me over. I was able to leave and breathe a sigh of relief. The man inside the school was later caught, but we never found out what his intentions were. The memory of that day haunted me, and my parents ended up putting me in therapy to help me out. No 15-year-old or anybody should have to experience anything like that. It's been about 7 years now, and I'm way better. We returned to our normal routines at school shortly after, and our school had a 24-hour cop for the next year. That made everyone feel a lot safer. I'm happy nobody got hurt and I was able to make it out alive. I wouldn't wish that experience upon my worst enemy.
This was on a regular weekday night. I was at home by myself, drinking a cup of coffee while staying up late in my room to get some work done. I had a tight deadline, and working late this night would make the rest of the week a lot easier on me. I was on my laptop at my desk, really focused and slightly tired, but my focus was broken when I heard a thump downstairs. I looked over at the doorway to my room where the sound echoed from, but remembered that it was raining outside and that the sound was probably just a house creaking in the rain and wind. I continued working, only to be interrupted again a moment later by another thump. I got up and walked to the bottom of the steps. All the lights were off, but I waited for the sound to come again so I could try and locate where it was, just to make sure it wasn't anything serious. I was still tired and had no reason to believe this was anything other than the house making sounds, and after a minute of waiting, I went back upstairs. Waiting around for something that was likely nothing was just a waste of my time, which I wanted to be spending on work so that I could get to bed. I went back to my laptop and worked for another hour and a half, not hearing any more sounds from downstairs, aside from a few small creaks every once in a while. It was close to 1 a.m., and I was just finishing up what I needed to get done for the night, when another thump echoed through the house. This one was much louder and sounded like it came from the bottom of the steps. I got up and rushed over to the stairs, a little more concerned now, but nothing was down there. I went down a few steps and looked over the railing, but the house was now just as quiet and empty as ever. The rain was still coming down, but this seemed to be far too loud and frequent than anything rain could be causing. After waiting again though, I got impatient and went back to my room. I had no idea what was going on, but I still couldn't see how it could be anything more than the house creaking. I sat back down at my desk, and it was almost right away that another thump rang through the house, this time sounding from right in the hall outside my room. I looked over at the half-open doorway, and not even a second later, a figure walked past it down the hall. My heart stopped for a moment as I felt a wave of shock run through me. I heard them walk into one of the spare bedrooms, and figuring they had to know I was home already, I ran up to my door and locked it shut. The footsteps stopped instantly, then began quickly going back into the hallway and right up to my door. I backed up and tried to find anything to use as a weapon. In this moment, I probably could have called 911, but I think I was too worried of something happening before they would have time to arrive. I picked up a pair of scissors from my desk as the man banged on the other side of the door. He then started what I think was kicking it, because it sounded as if the door could snap out of the frame at any second. But then he stopped. I heard heavy breathing from against the door, then footsteps going down the stairs. I got my phone from my desk and called 911 as their steps started making their way through the downstairs hallways. A door closed, I think it was the back door, and then the house was silent. Police actually came really quick, getting to my house in just 2 or 3 minutes, and I almost had another scare when I heard footsteps sprinting out of the house. I think by closing the door, he was trying to trick me into thinking he left, which kind of worked, but I was still too scared to go downstairs without the police being there. Anyway, I ran out and got the police, but whoever that man was had already run off, and even with more cars patrolling the neighborhood, they never found him. There's so many questions to it that will haunt me for the rest of my life probably, especially since he's out there right now and could be stalking me or waiting for another time to break in. His intent is not clear, but the investigators seem to think he had broken into the house in the morning, possibly while I was out of the house. It's likely he was waiting for me to go to sleep before doing whatever it was he planned, but if he had been hiding for several hours, I don't think it would have been just to steal a few things. I work 4 days a week on 10 to 12 hour overnight shifts, which means I have to sleep during the day and be up at night at least 4 days a week. However, switching up my sleep schedule on my days off usually causes me to get much worse sleep and just feel tired, so I started sticking to the same schedule all week. I'd usually get in bed around noon and wake up at 8 p.m. It was hard to get used to, but I had to do it for work, and after a few months it wasn't too terrible. On one of my days off a few months ago, I got up at 9 p.m., having breakfast and doing some chores, then went out for a run just before midnight. This was a somewhat normal looking day off for me. Sometimes I would have my lazy days, but for the most part, I'd try to go for a run within the first few hours of my day. My house is right next to a forest preserve, so I take the same path every time. It's basically just a big loop inside the forest preserve, and I'll go around it as many times as I need before I feel like I'm done. I started going along this trail, looping around 2 full times before a man appeared on the path. When I first noticed him, he was too far down to see well, but it looked like he was just walking. As I started to get closer though, I realized he wasn't moving. He was wearing a dark sweatshirt and baggy pants, facing my direction as I approached him. When I passed by, he slowly moved his head to follow, like he was watching me. I looked back and saw him still standing there. It creeped me out and had me thinking for a couple minutes, but when I looped around again, he was gone. I don't know if maybe he took a shortcut through the woods. The exit was on the opposite side from where he was standing though, and he definitely didn't pass me on the path. Him having appeared and left in such a strange way gave me a bad feeling, causing me to cut the run short and head home. I left the forest and jogged through the street to my house. When I got inside, I chugged some water and sat down, only to be startled up by a sound right outside my front door. It was almost 1 a.m., so nobody should have been at my house. I walked up and looked through the peephole. A man was on my porch, and I recognized him from his dark sweatshirt as the same man from the forest preserve. I felt my stomach drop as I watched him just stand there. He didn't knock or ring the doorbell. I must have watched him for a whole minute, seeing the man do nothing more than glance around a few times. I started to get really creeped out, thinking about how he had to have followed me home and was clearly not behaving normally. I walked back to my kitchen and quietly dialed 911, telling them about a possible stalker that was outside my house. After reporting it, I went back to the door and the man was still there. He stood in the same place, glancing around and never knocking or anything for the next 10 minutes. Even when the police car pulled up, he didn't run. He acted like nothing was wrong and gave no explanation for what he was doing at my house or why he followed me. Almost equally as terrifying, they couldn't actually hold the guy under arrest because he hadn't really done anything yet. It was clear his behavior was off and something was wrong with him, but it wasn't enough to do anything about it. I don't know why that guy followed me and creepily stood outside my house, but with him behaving the way he was, I wouldn't doubt it if he had something horrible in mind. I was on a road trip coming back from my vacation. The drive home was long, about 16 hours, but I was determined to make it in one go without having to buy a room at a hotel. As the sun started to set though, my eyes were getting really heavy. I forced myself to stay awake by snacking on some food I brought with, but that only lasted so long, and I knew I'd eventually need a break. At least just a nap for an hour or something, but maybe even to cut my losses and sleep until morning. The road was empty though. There were no towns or anything in sight that I could stop at. I zoomed out on the map and tried to see what places were coming up, but the only close town was an hour away. I really wasn't sure if I could safely make it there, and after a couple more minutes, I knew I couldn't. I saw a sign for a gas station half a mile down and turned off the highway. The gas station was the only building on this exit, sitting at the corner of an intersection with two deserted roads leading to what seemed to be nowhere. Pulling into the parking lot, I also noticed that the main building had all its lights off. The actual gas portion was still lit and looked like it was still usable, but I guess they don't have any workers there overnight, which made me a lot less comfortable. I parked right on the side and spent the next 5 minutes keeping an eye out and making sure this place was safe. From what it looked, nobody came here. No cars came in for gas, and not a single car even passed by on the road. It was an eerie place to be, that I won't argue with, but I didn't necessarily feel unsafe because nobody was here. I leaned my seat all the way back, turned off my car, and fell asleep. I don't remember checking the time before I fell asleep, but when I opened my eyes, it was 2 a.m. I was in that foggy state of waking up, unsure why my eyes opened, until I heard a clanking sound from outside. I turned my head toward the main part of the gas station. There was a man standing behind one of the pumps. I could see him moving around and messing with something, but the pump was blocking most of my view. What I didn't see, though, was his car. Not in the parking section or by the pumps. It was just him. I looked around once more, seeing again that there were absolutely no places within miles of here. The man continued messing with something, then after a minute he turned around and walked away. I lost sight of him as the gas station blocked my view, but it looked like he was going toward the road. After a few minutes, I assumed he was gone for sure, but I still had no idea what he was even doing. It made me a little bit uneasy, but I was too tired to keep thinking about it. I slowly dozed off, but it wasn't for very long before I shot awake to the sound of something against my car. I turned my head and saw a man staring into my car through the window right next to me. My heart almost stopped, listening to them trying to open the doors. I didn't know what to do. The way the man was acting, it almost seemed like he didn't even know I was inside, but he was looking through the window, so unless the glare was too bad to see through, this man had to have some really bad intentions. I stayed quiet, but then the man abruptly turned around and went up to the side of the gas station. He knelt down, picking something up, and I immediately turned on my car and floored it in reverse. The man spun around with what looked like a metal pipe in his hand and stared at me as I drove away. My heart was beating so fast, I was now fully awake, and I stayed that way for the rest of the drive. What that man was trying to do is something I'm happy not to know, but the circumstances of it all were just terrifying. The man clearly had been there before and was doing something with the gas pumps too. It looked like he was only seconds away from smashing my window and getting in, and what would have happened afterwards is unknown.
I worked at a super Target for almost 2 years. I quit just a couple of months ago and have gotten another job since then. But working at Target was good for the most part. When I was first hired, I started out as a cashier. But after a few months, I changed and worked around the store and only did cashier when an extra one was needed. Usually that was just at busier times or if somebody called in. So this story is something that happened probably about a year ago maybe. I was working at night and things were pretty quiet. I was back, sort of near the electronics department, which is at the back center of the store. It was then that a man approached me and said that he needed help with something. The guy was sort of tall and I remember was wearing a black sweatshirt. I asked him how I could help and he said that he was looking for some plates. He asked me if I could show him where they were and said that he had been looking around for a while. I said that I could and I knew exactly where they were. I understood how it might be hard for him to find them. We would remodel our store and organize it quite often, and we're always updating things. The plates and silverware were in the far back corner of the store, which is generally a quieter area. The man followed me as I walked over there, which didn't take very long. Soon we made it to the general area. When I was approaching the aisle at the far back corner, I noticed something a little bit strange. There were 3 other men standing around near the plates. Each of them was wearing a ski mask over their heads. I couldn't tell who they were or anything because of this. They were all just standing there, facing me. And when I started to approach, they looked at me. This seemed very suspicious and gave me a bad feeling. Why were they all wearing ski masks and what were they doing? They didn't seem to be looking at anything, but when I came into view, they were suddenly all looking at me. I only saw them for probably 3 or 4 seconds, and then I turned and walked down the very next aisle to get out of there. When I did, I heard the first guy who had been following me say to wait, but I didn't. I just kept walking and got out of that area. I felt better when I was a few aisles away. The guy did not keep following me and I was now by myself. I didn't bother to look back to see if the guys were still there or not. I went to another area of the store and went back to work doing what I had been going to do before the guy asked me for help. As I was over there, I was wondering what exactly was going on. I still didn't know why those guys were wearing masks. Most people don't just go into a store wearing ski masks unless they're planning to rob the place or something. I looked around as I worked, but I didn't see any of the other guys. After several minutes, I decided to go back over and see if they were still there. I'm not sure if I was just really curious or what. I walked over to the corner of the store, and when I got there, saw nobody. There wasn't really anybody at all in that immediate area. By then, it was probably about 9 p.m. and there weren't many shoppers at all. The ones that were inside the store were mostly on the other side where groceries were. I worked until 10 p.m., so I only had about an hour left and went back to work in the meantime. During that final hour of work, I did not see any of the men. Then, at 10 o'clock, the store closed, and I walked up to the front, clocked out, and left. There was a door in the middle for employees only where I would leave. As I left the store and started walking through the parking lot to my vehicle, there were still a decent amount of cars there. Quite a few people worked overnights at Target, and some others hadn't left yet that were still there. But I hadn't even made it that far when I spotted a car with about 4 people in it. I immediately noticed the men wearing masks as the same men who had been inside the store earlier. The car was a ways away, but I saw the people inside turn and look at me as I approached. I turned right back around when I saw this and walked for the employee door that I had come out of. The employee door was only about 20 feet away, and when I got back to it, somebody else was leaving. That allowed me to go back inside of the store. When I was in there, I went into the break room and just waited. I had a really bad feeling about those guys. I wasn't sure why they were still there either. About 15 minutes later, I went back out and checked, and the men were now gone. After that, I walked out to my vehicle and left. I never saw those people again after that, although the only one I would have recognized was the guy who had asked me for help. Everybody else had been wearing a ski mask over their face. My theory is that it was some type of a setup. I was lucky to get away as early as I did. I worked at a Target department store briefly when I was aged 16 to 17. This was kind of a long time ago now, maybe like 2014 or 15. When I got the job, I was a cashier, and I worked there for about 6 months. It was a job that I liked, but wasn't the best job in the world or anything. I would mostly just be up at the check lanes ringing up customers. This occurrence happened probably about 3 months or so after I started working there. Back then, I had recently gotten my own car. It was actually my parents' car, but they let me use it because nobody else really did. I would drive it to and from work from my parents' house, which was almost 10 minutes away. This time, I was working from like 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. or something like that. I don't remember the exact hours, but that was probably pretty close. About an hour or so in, I got a phone call on my cell phone. I had my ringtone set to vibrate so that it wouldn't make noise at work, but I could feel it. I was unable to answer it or even look to see who it was because I was busy. There were several customers in line waiting for me to help them. My phone rang again before I had a chance to look. Finally, when there was a short break in people, maybe 10 minutes later, I looked. It was a number that I did not recognize and figured maybe it was a wrong number or something. I went back to work after that, but whoever it was called me yet again. It seemed pretty odd. As I was busy working, I don't even know how many more times the person called me. It was at least 3 or 4. When it was time for my break, I went in and looked to see who it was. By now it was probably about 7 p.m., and I saw that the same person kept calling me. As I was doing that, they called again. Now that I wasn't working, I answered it. I heard a man's voice speaking, and I did not recognize who it was. He asked if he was speaking to me, mentioning my name. I said yes, and was surprised. I asked who this was that was calling. The man said that he was waiting for me. He said he knew I was working at Target, and he would be waiting for me when I left by my car. He said he was in the parking lot. I was very worried when I heard this. I didn't know what to say and was speechless for a few moments. The guy then hung up on me. Suddenly, everything changed. It went from a normal shift to very weird and scary. For several minutes, I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to go out to my car, and the guy was there. Possibly it was just a joke, but I didn't want to take any chances. I knew that I was parked in the back of the parking lot where it was not well lit. I ended up calling my mom and telling her about the calls that I had received. She told me that she would pick me up, or my dad could. I did not feel safe walking out to my car. I also blocked the number that had been calling me. I went back to work after my break and kept a careful eye out. During the time that I was working, things were not as busy anymore. I was looking all around for anybody looking at me or seeming suspicious in any way. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary though. When it was 9 o'clock and I got off, my mom and dad called me and said that they were there to pick me up. I was really happy I wouldn't have to go back to my car by myself. I left the Target and went to my parents' car right out front. We drove through the parking lot and my dad wanted to go past my car. We did, and it was really dark so we couldn't see much, but there was a car parked just a few spaces from mine, and somebody was inside of it. I couldn't tell any details about them though. Could that have been the person who had been calling me? We drove away after that. I left my car at the Target for like an hour, and then my dad went and got it. He said that the guy was gone who had been there before. After that experience, the person never bothered me again. I still have lots of questions though. I work at Target, and I'm going to tell you something that happened a couple of months ago. I've been working there for 6 months now, and I'm mainly a cashier. I do some other things around the store as well though. For the entire time that I've been an employee, I've also been part-time. Most weeks I get between 20 and 40 hours, with my record being 36. I work a lot of times at night, and our store closes at 10 p.m. But when I get to work, it's usually about 2 p.m. or so things are busier then. I have always parked at the far back of the parking lot and away from the store. We are not required to do so, but it's a habit for me. Plus, when I get there, the parking lot is often a lot busier. So one time, I was working 2 o'clock to 10 on a Saturday. When I arrived at Target at about 1:45 p.m., the parking lot was especially packed. Weekends are typically much busier than weekdays, and I don't remember if we had a sale going on or something, but it was really busy. I parked all the way at the back corner of the parking lot. The Target parking lot is connected with some other businesses as well. There was a Chili's restaurant that the parking lot connected very close to where I had parked. I got out and walked inside Target. Then I started my shift. It went pretty fast in the beginning. Over time, things slowed down, and eventually it became nighttime. The last couple of hours dragged on, but at 10 p.m. I was finally off. I clocked out and left the store. By now, it was nighttime and the parking lot was basically empty. There were a few cars in the middle, and I could see my car all by itself in the back far corner. I walked out to it and got inside. I drive a smaller SUV called a Jeep Cherokee. When I got inside my car, I did what I usually do. I have a habit of going on my phone and checking the text and stuff that I got during work, or at least during the last few hours of work. Then I drive home. On this night, as I sat in my car in the quiet parking lot, I noticed a man walking. He was coming out of the Chili's parking lot, which was also very quiet now at this hour. The man had a backpack on and started going closer to my car. I was expecting him to walk through the Target parking lot and then go who knows where. It seemed like he was going to go past my car, but I noticed him looking over at me a few times. When the man got directly behind my car, he then stopped. Then he got right up to the back of my window and started looking inside of it. I thought that this was really weird and didn't know what this guy was doing. I wasn't really sure what to do either. I couldn't drive away because he was blocking me. The guy was looking directly into the rear window to my car. I hoped that he would just walk away, but he didn't at first. The guy remained there for a very uncomfortable amount of time. I didn't want to open the window and ask him what he was doing or get out or anything. Instead, I just watched him and waited. I'm guessing that he was there for about 2 minutes, but obviously it felt like much longer. Finally, at last, the man moved away from my window and started walking away towards the Target. Right then and there, I should have backed away and left, but I didn't. The guy got about 15 feet from my car and then took his backpack off. I'm not really sure why I was still watching him, other than I was just curious. He opened up the backpack and then pulled out what appeared to be a hammer. Then he suddenly started charging at me. He was going straight towards my driver's door. I had little to no time to react. When he reached me, he swung the hammer at my driver's window and the window broke. By then, I was finally able to get the car into reverse and hit the gas. The man swung the hammer again, but only hit part of the front window, which cracked part of it, but the window didn't break. I sped out of the Target parking lot like a maniac and then called the police. I drove home and just hoped that the police would catch the guy. I was told later on that they did in fact find him. Apparently, he had smashed several windows of other vehicles in the area. I had been the only person inside of a vehicle at the time that the window got smashed though. It remains one of the scariest things to ever happen to me. Last week, I went to Target after the gym just to get some milk. It was a weekday morning and probably like 11 a.m. I went to the Target not that far away from my apartment and went inside. I walked straight for the grocery department, which was at the far other end of the store. Things didn't seem all that busy at first. When I got to the groceries, I found the milk, took one, and then walked up to the checkout. When I got near the check lanes, I saw that there was a very long line. I was kind of surprised because the store wasn't even that busy, but there was nothing that I could do. I waited in line and things moved slowly. After probably 5 minutes or so of waiting, finally it was my turn at one of the self-check lanes. It didn't take me long at all to pay for the milk, and then I was on my way and left the store. I walked to my car that was at the back of the parking lot and got inside. It was then that I saw I had a new text message on my phone from a number not familiar to me. I opened it up and saw a picture of myself waiting in line inside Target, taken just minutes earlier. It was taken from near the exit doors and kind of zoomed in. I thought it must be from one of my friends and they were playing a joke on me or something. I had gotten a new phone not that long before this, so it must have been why I didn't recognize the number. I was thinking of which friend it would be that would go there. When I was inside, I definitely hadn't seen anybody that I knew or recognized. I texted back, asking who it was. Whoever had sent me the text responded pretty quickly. So fast that I saw it before I even put my phone down. It said in all caps, "Your stalker." Obviously, this still seemed like a joke to me. I replied something like, "LOL," and then I set my phone down to drive home. I went back to my apartment, which is a 4-story building with a large parking lot. When I arrived back, I saw that I had a new text, and I looked at it before getting out of my car. The text said, "No, really." I responded again by asking who this was that was texting me. They responded very quickly once more, but it was a picture. I looked at it and saw that it was of the back of my car. I looked behind me in the parking lot and saw a car parked directly behind me in the other row. I could see somebody in the driver's seat but couldn't make out any details. Whoever it was appeared to be wearing a hat and sunglasses. I didn't recognize them or the car as anybody that I knew though. By now, I was really creeped out and I was afraid to go inside my apartment. Maybe whoever it was would try to follow me inside. I blocked the number and then backed out of my parking space and started driving away. I hadn't noticed the car following me to my apartment at all, but I now noticed it following me out of the parking lot. When I left my apartment complex, I merged onto a busier road. There were lots of cars going both ways. The car behind me followed as I drove a little ways down. I came up to a flashing yellow arrow to turn left, and I got in the left turn lane. Traffic was thick, and cars were coming non-stop, so I was unable to turn immediately. Then, finally, when the light turned to a solid yellow, I had an opportunity to go. But I waited until the very last moment, when the cars were starting to come from the opposite direction. By the time I went, the car behind me couldn't go and was stuck at the light. I was able to get away for a few minutes, and I drove right back to my apartment complex. This time, when I got there, I parked on the other side of the parking lot. Then, I quickly went inside. I didn't even bother to look out the window to the parking lot to see if the person came back. But after that, I didn't receive any more strange texts. I haven't seen them since either. When I was a kid, I went to Chuck E. Cheese a number of times. It was pretty popular back then for kids to go to for birthday parties or for whatever reason. I always loved going there, and every part about it was cool. But one time, when I was about 8 years old, that all changed. I was invited to my friend's birthday party, and it would be at the local Chuck E. Cheese. He was a friend of mine and classmate from school. I think his name was Ben, and we weren't really that great of friends, but he invited like 20 people. The party was that Saturday, and the neighborhood that I lived in was really close by to the Chuck E. Cheese. In fact, I could walk there if I wanted to. So, on Saturday, my parents actually did in fact let me walk there. It took me under 10 minutes, and our neighborhood was very safe that I was aware of. I don't remember any crime happening or ever feeling scared to leave my house. I got to the Chuck E. Cheese and was one of the first kids there. I talked to Ben, and pretty quickly a bunch of other kids started showing up. After that, I don't remember a whole lot. We were just playing arcade games, eating pizza, and drinking soda. It was a pretty fun time, just like any other experience that I had at Chuck E. Cheese as a kid. There were other people there too, but for my friend's party, they had rented off a little room of space. He had cake as well, and the party lasted for probably 2 or 3 hours. Then, when people started to leave, I decided to go home. I remember I told Ben's parents that I was going to walk home, and they offered to give me a ride. I told them how close I lived, and they made sure that my parents knew I was walking home, but they said it was okay. So then I left. I was happy to walk back by myself because it made me feel older than I actually was, and when I walked home on that day, everything was fine. I took the sidewalk past the Chuck E. Cheese and behind it. That led right into the residential neighborhood that I lived in. Then I just walked a few blocks and only had to turn once. It was still daytime and just seemed like a regular Saturday to me. I don't remember noticing anything out of the ordinary. I made it home, and after getting there, I don't really remember what I did for the rest of the day. Probably just the typical stuff of watching TV or playing video games. I lived with my parents and younger brother in a one-story house that wasn't really that big or small. I went to bed that night, and this is where things get really creepy. I had my bedroom all to myself, and my window was next to my bed and looked out to the backyard. At some point, in the middle of the night, I woke up. I'm not really sure why I did, but when I did, I was really groggy and kind of looked around my room wondering what time it was. I then sat up to look at my clock/radio that was on my nightstand next to me. It was then that I realized something was outside of my window. My blinds covered the window, but they were open partly. Then I remember looking over to see a large Chuck E. Cheese mask. It was the mask of the mouse, and somebody was standing there, wearing it over their head and staring into my window. The feeling that I got when I saw it was the most scared I had ever been, for sure. I was also shocked, and I just couldn't believe it. It was so random and bizarre. I moved back and got off of my bed. Then I ran away and into my brother's bedroom. He was fast asleep, and I just kind of stood in there for a while, just inside the doorway, not knowing what to do. Eventually, I went into the living room and turned on the TV. I didn't want to wake anybody else up, but I also didn't want to go back into my bedroom, and I couldn't sleep. I don't recall hearing anything else strange, and I didn't see the guy for the rest of the night. Eventually, I fell asleep on the living room couch. When my parents and brother got up, they asked me what I was doing on the couch, and I remembered the whole thing and told it to them. They were confused, and I think they believed me, but it was just such a weird situation. I even questioned myself many times if I actually saw what I think I did. I definitely was not half asleep though. I know that I was wide awake. We went outside and saw something extremely creepy. Just below my window on the grass, there were some Chuck E. Cheese tickets. I never saw the guy again or experienced anything like that after. I wonder if it was somebody from Chuck E. Cheese who followed me home or something. To me, that makes the most sense. But like I said, I didn't notice anything unusual. Still to this day, I'm left with many questions about that experience. This is something that happened almost 10 years ago now. It was 2015, and at the time, I was a divorced mother of a 10-year-old boy. I enjoyed spending time with my son, and we would do fun things together all the time. One night, I took him to Chuck E. Cheese. It was fairly busy, and there were a lot of other people there. My son always loved going there, and I would usually just sit at a table as he played the games. He was old enough that I didn't need to always keep an eye on him, so I sat at one of the tables and went on my phone. On this night in particular, I was pretty much by myself at one of the tables. My son was in the arcade somewhere, and nobody was sitting immediately near me. At one point though, a man came up and sat at my table. I didn't see where he had come from. I just noticed when he sat down, and I looked up to see him there. He looked to be around my age, so roughly late 30s, and had really short blonde hair. I was a little bit confused by why he was sitting at my table, and I looked up at him. That's when he just stated that his kid loved Chuck E. Cheese. I said that mine did too, and we talked very briefly about our kids. I don't remember much of what he said, because I was still confused as to why he had come up to me in the first place. He must have sensed my confusion, because he then stuck out his hand for me to shake and introduced himself to me. He said that his name was Dave, and I gave my name to him. Then he said that he better get going, and he got up and walked away. I watched him walk back into the arcade and out of my sight. The whole encounter was a little bit strange. I stayed where I was for probably another 30 minutes or so. I didn't see Dave at all for the rest of the night. After my son had used up all of his tokens, he came over and got something with his tickets, and then we left. It was the next day that I was on Facebook when I saw that I had a friend request from a guy named Dave. At first, I didn't know who he was, so I clicked on his profile. I then realized that it was the same man who had talked to me at Chuck E. Cheese the previous night. This was kind of weird, because I had only given him my first name, and I wasn't really sure how he found me. We didn't have any mutual friends or anything. There wasn't a whole lot on his profile as far as information or pictures either. I don't really know why, but I accepted his friend request. Unless it was obviously a robot or something, I would kind of automatically accept everyone. But that proved to be a mistake, as only about an hour later he started sending me messages. He started out by saying hi and asking what I was doing. I wasn't interested in talking to him, to be honest, and I didn't respond. He kept sending me messages though. By the next day, there was about 10 more unread messages that I had from him. I finally decided to respond and asked him why he was sending me so many messages. He replied saying because I wasn't responding. He then asked me if I wanted to hang out with him, and I told him no thanks, and that's when his mood started to change. He started cursing me out and calling me things that I won't repeat here. I told him that if he didn't stop messaging me, I was going to block him. That's when he said something that really made me worry. He said something like, "Go ahead, I know where you live." It gave me the chills to read it, because based on his behavior, I thought that maybe he did somehow know. He then said that he didn't even have a kid. I blocked him and reported his account for harassment to Facebook. I just hoped that that would be it and I wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. For a few days, I didn't hear from Dave or see him at all. But then, one night, he came to my house. Luckily, my son wasn't home at the time and was at a friend's house. It was probably about 8 or 9 p.m., and I would be leaving to pick up my son soon. There was a knock on my front door to the house, and I knew instantly based on how late it was that it was probably Dave. My heart was racing as I walked over to look out one of the front windows. He knocked on the door again as I saw him standing there. I wasn't going to answer it, but soon he started yelling. I heard him say that he knew I was home and to open up the door. I was thinking that this guy had to have been crazy or something. He started looking around to the windows, and I quickly moved away. I knew that this was grounds to call the police, and I got my phone from the counter and dialed 911. As I was talking to the operator, Dave started yelling something else, but I wasn't paying attention to him. I was told that a police officer was in the area and would head over. I figured they would be there in a couple of minutes, and I started to feel better. Meanwhile, Dave kept knocking on the door. He was clearly angry now, and I heard him yell at me that if I didn't open the door for him, he was going to break in. That's when the relief that I felt went away, and I was just as worried as I had ever been. I still didn't bother to say anything back to Dave, though. Instead, I moved into my hallway and entered the bathroom. Then I closed the door and locked it, and hoped that Dave wouldn't actually try to break in. The bathroom had a small window that faced our backyard. At first, when I was in there, things were quiet now that I was farther away from Dave. I could barely hear the knocking, but then the knocking stopped. Probably about 2 minutes later, I then heard noises coming from the backyard. It sounded like Dave was possibly banging on the kitchen window. This only lasted for a few seconds though, and then it stopped. I didn't hear anything for a few minutes after that. The next thing I knew, I got a call from the police saying that they were there. I left my bathroom and saw several officers outside of my house with flashing lights. They had actually caught Dave, and I was told that he had been hiding in my backyard. I pressed charges against him for harassment and later got a restraining order. I'm happy to say that I've never seen him since then. When I was a kid, one of my classes in school won a field trip to Chuck E. Cheese. I don't remember at all how or why we won it, but I know that we were all very excited. I had only been to Chuck E. Cheese one previous time, and I think I was about 10 years old back then. When it was time for class that day, we all met in the classroom and then walked out to the bus. I remember that it was a great feeling leaving school during a school day to go to Chuck E. Cheese. We rode the bus for about 10 minutes to get there, and then we went inside. This Chuck E. Cheese was located near a strip mall at the local shopping area for our city. It wasn't very busy being a weekday during the daytime, and there was probably about 20 or 30 of us kids total. We all got a number of tokens to play the games, and there were a few pizzas for us as well. We all started running around playing the arcade games and stuff. It was turning out to be one of the best school days of my life to that point. But I remember that about 30 minutes in or so, I was looking for a new game to play. I just kind of wandered off to the corner by myself just to see everything that was over there. That particular area didn't have a whole lot, and there was nobody else really in that area. I walked past a couple of those car racing game machines, I think. Well, between them and another game, I saw a grown man crouched down like he was hiding. He was really hard to see, and I'm surprised that I even saw him at all, to be honest. When I did, I first started to walk past, but I realized I saw somebody and I stopped. Then I went closer to examine and see if there actually was a man there. When I did, I got within about 50 feet of the guy, and he turned and looked at me. I gave him probably a confused look, but didn't say anything. He then smiled and put his finger up to his mouth, signaling me to be quiet. I guess this guy was playing hide and seek with maybe a kid or something. It seemed really weird, but I didn't think too much of it. I kind of nodded back to him and then left him alone. I kept moving, trying to decide which game that I would play next. After not finding anything in that corner that I wanted to play, I started to move back over to the other games. But not far from that area, I found a game and started to play it. I was at that game for maybe 5 minutes or so. At one point of being there, I happened to look over to the quiet corner that I had been at before. I don't know why, but I just did. It was near where I had seen the man who had been hiding. But now I saw the guy again. He was standing up and with a girl who was not in my class. She appeared to be younger than me, and at first I figured that she was his daughter. But I noticed that they were walking towards the emergency exit, and the way the guy looked, I just had a bad feeling. Something just wasn't right, and I decided to walk over. I had no plan and didn't know what I was going to do or say. I started walking straight for the guy, and he then saw me. What happened next was really surprising. He had been holding on to the little girl's hand, and then he let her go. Then he walked towards the exit door and left. The girl remained inside, standing there. I guess it wasn't an emergency exit, because no kind of alarm or anything went off, but the guy was now gone. I walked over to the girl and asked her if she knew that guy. She didn't say anything to me, but shook her head no. After that, I walked with her back over to my teacher and told her about what had happened. The man was long gone, though. I'm not really sure what else was done, because I went back over to the arcade, and I don't remember a whole lot of details after, but I'm glad that I saw the man both times. Something about him just seemed suspicious from the start. I trusted my instincts, and my instincts were right. When I was a little younger, I worked at a Chuck E. Cheese. It was for a stretch of about a year, back in 2016. The job was pretty average for me. I had worked at a couple of somewhat similar places, like a bowling alley and a restaurant. I was in college, so I was part-time and would not have the most consistent hours. This story takes place on a Thursday night when I was working a later shift until close. At the Chuck E. Cheese that I worked at, we had a break room in the back for employees. It was kind of what you would expect in an average break room. There were a few tables and chairs, and there was a fridge and a vending machine as well. After working a few hours of my shift, it was time for me to take one of my breaks. We didn't have a whole lot of employees working at once, so there would often only be one of us taking breaks at a time. When I got to the break room and walked inside, I sat down at a table. Then I started to just go on my phone like I always did. There was also a little TV in there that was on some random channel at a low volume. But as I sat in there, I thought I heard a noise. I didn't know what it was though, because I was the only person in there. I was looking around, sort of confused. That's when I suddenly saw in the corner, behind the vending machine, somebody was there. I just barely saw part of their body, and only because I leaned my body over a little and looked. As I did this, the person suddenly stood up. He was a man, and I don't know who he was. I remember that he had a beard and kind of messy hair. As he stood up, I was too surprised to say anything at first. But then, I noticed the man was walking towards me. He didn't say anything as he did. The way that he was walking towards me was like he was trying to sneak up on me, but I could see him the whole time. It really creeped me out, and finally, when he was less than 10 feet away, I stood up. I said something like, "What are you doing, man?" The man did not answer me and kept getting closer. I turned and ran out of there as fast as I could. I didn't look back and ran all the way to the front of the building. It was a quiet night, and there weren't too many customers in the arcade or anything. I just wanted to get to the area with the most people, though. I found one of my coworkers and let them know about the guy. We debated whether we should go back to the break room or not. The guy might have been dangerous. After probably a 5-minute discussion, we decided to go back there. I walked back to the break room with my coworker. When we got there, the door was closed. We knocked and let the man know that he had to leave, but we got no answer. My coworker then opened the door against my warning. When we looked inside though, the man was nowhere to be seen. The entire break room was messed up. Tables were flipped over, chairs were upside down and on top of tables. The fridge was open and the garbage was tipped over and spilled. He basically trashed the room. We searched it, but he was gone. I guess he must have left after I had run out. We cleaned up the mess, which took about 10 minutes, but in all honesty, I was just glad that the man was gone and he didn't hurt anyone. That was my scariest experience working at Chuck E. Cheese.
I was 16 last year, and me and my friend Leon were hanging out a few days before Halloween, talking about what we wanted to do. We felt too old to go trick-or-treating, but we also still wanted to do something and have some fun during the holiday. We thought up a few ideas, most being quickly discarded, but then I thought of something different. I reminded Leon of the abandoned farm that both of us had already known about and suggested we explore it. It would be creepy and thrilling, which was exactly what we wanted for Halloween. Also, compared to our other ideas, this one was the best by a long shot. Leon was excited about it too, but we both agreed that other people would probably have the same idea to go on October 31st. So instead, we chose to go on the night before. We didn't want to risk running into anyone crazy at an abandoned place like that. We just wanted to explore and maybe be a little bit spooked, then leave, which sounded harmless enough. On the 30th, Leon drove us out to the neighborhood it was by and parked on the road. Then we got out and walked through the neighborhood until we got to the street that turned into a gravel path. This was the driveway leading up to the farm. I'd only ever seen the place during the day, but it was pretty much just a large field of grass with a typical wooden barn and a single-story home. From the edge of the path, neither structure was visible. Our flashlights only lit up a few feet ahead as we started making our way down the gravel driveway. Once we started to get closer, we could see the outline of the barn on the left side and the house further back at the end of the driveway. We were more interested in the house, figuring the barn was probably completely empty and not very exciting. We kept walking and got to a clearing of the tall grass. It was like a circle of dirt and short grass that went around the perimeter of the house. As we approached the front, we passed by some large farming equipment. I don't know what they were, just some sort of old tractor-looking things that had been left out for years. Even with our dim flashlights, we could see that they were engulfed in rust. When we got up to the porch, it looked like the door had been replaced by a solid wooden board. We walked around the whole outside of the house, and every window and door was sealed and covered. Disappointed, we went back to the front of the house and tried to think of something else. As we stood there, we saw the path going up to the barn. It wasn't an actual path, it was more of just a line of flattened grass. With nothing else to do, we started heading for the barn. Something felt different as we approached it, compared to when we approached the house. It was just an uneasy feeling that grew as we got closer. When we reached it, the large door was already wide open. I walked in first and Leon followed behind, both shining our flashlights around as we entered. It only took a couple seconds for a horrid smell to hit us, though it was a barn, so it wasn't exactly surprising. But then we noticed something else. There were footprints all over the ground, but not what you'd expect from other kids exploring the place. They all went in a line, back and forth from a single point on the other side of the barn. I saw in Leon's eyes that he was just as freaked out as I was, but that was the goal of going there in the first place. We slowly walked in line with the footprints, leading to a wooden cellar hatch that was blended in with the floor. The only noticeable thing, other than the clear footsteps going up to it, was a shiny new padlock that held the hatch shut. Before we could really think about it, a sudden thud shook the whole barn. We turned around, seeing the door had been shut behind us. Leon sprinted over and shoved the door back open, and both of us looked around but didn't see anyone. Now terrified, we sprinted straight through the tall grass back to the gravel driveway, then booked it to the neighborhood where the car was. We definitely got the scare we were looking for, but maybe even too much so. Neither of us ever tried to figure out what really happened that night, but a couple months later, we saw that the whole house and barn had been blocked off. We tried to look up why, but there was no word publicly about it. What was going on there remains a mystery, but I think if we had stayed to find out, we may have never left. It was the fall of 2018 when this happened to me. I was 22, and at the time I was living temporarily on the East Coast, right outside of the Appalachian mountain range. I'll go ahead and admit that I've never been too much of an outdoorsy person and hadn't had any experience in camping or anything, nor was I really that interested in those sorts of activities. However, this was my last year living in probably the best place to do all those outdoor things. Plus, with it being mid-fall and the trees looking pretty and the weather being nice, I figured this was my chance to try it out. I didn't want to go for a huge camping adventure or anything, so I found a simple hiking trail instead that had some good views of the mountains. I prepped a small backpack with water, snacks, and a first aid kit. No cars were there, though it was just a small dirt parking area, so I guess it wasn't as popular as I thought. I parked and started walking. It was calm, and it definitely didn't feel like a path a lot of people would take. It didn't have any noticeable recent shoe prints in the dirt. It was just a fairly small path, with trees on either side. As I got further in, the entire path became more densely covered in trees, enough to block out a lot of the sun and make the whole trail shaded. It was actually really nice and cooling, but not hearing or seeing anyone else became more of an unsettling thought the further out I got. Not in a creepy way, but just that I was entirely alone. It wasn't something I was used to. About an hour, or maybe even 2 hours down the trail, I was caught off guard by seeing a man ahead of me. He was sitting on the side, looking like he was just taking a break under one of the trees. As I passed him, I gave a friendly nod and said hi, to which he looked up at me and said nothing. He didn't smile or nod. He just looked at me for a few seconds, and then I looked away. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe he didn't hear me, or maybe I caught him off guard as well, but the strange look, without even a slight smile, was not giving me a good feeling. I walked a bit faster for the next part of the trail, hoping to put some distance between us. After an hour, I slowed down and made it to the end, which was an overlook of the mountains. The fall colors on the trees made the view way better than it probably would have been any other time of the year, and overall, I was glad to have made the hike. I stared off into the distance for a few minutes, enjoying a view that I almost never got to see, but when I turned around to leave, my heart almost left my body when I saw the man from earlier standing right at the end of the trail. He was maybe 10 feet from me, and I never heard him walking up. After the initial scare, I realized how creepy it was that he was just standing there and not coming up to look out the overlook like a normal person would be doing. But then he did something even more odd. His face shifted as he smiled and said hi, asking me how the view was.
"Yeah, it's really nice. You should take a look too,"
I responded, trying to be polite but still really confused. The man stepped closer, then pointed to my right and said there was an even better view down that trail. I looked over my shoulder to where he was pointing. There was a path, barely visible, going through the dense trees. It was rugged and undefined, not something that looked to be used very often. The man walked up to where the path started and stood at the entrance, telling me again about how great the view was and saying it was just a minute or two to walk there. I politely declined, but he continued to tell me about how great it was, to the point where it was obvious that he had to have other intentions than just wanting me to go there and see a nice view. I said I was okay and had to get home, then started to walk toward the main trail, but the man was quick to move his body in front of it. I stopped in place, now even more terrified and thinking of the possible intentions of this man, who was just a few feet from me in the middle of an empty forest. The man looked at me with a blank expression. I took a few steps, walking around him and just hoping that nothing escalated, and for some miraculous reason, it didn't. The man watched me as I made my way around him and down the trail. Every time I looked back, he was still watching me, not even trying to be discreet. Thankfully, he didn't follow, and I made it back to my car. I don't know what that man was trying to do, but it was almost surely not anything good. What was down that path likely was just a dead end, somewhere for him to lead me before doing whatever horrible thing he had in mind. I don't know why he didn't stop me from leaving either. Maybe he was worried about doing something on the main trail. All I can say is that I'm lucky to have gotten out before something else happened. During October in our town, there's always this place that opens up with a bunch of fall and Halloween related things to do. It's a huge fair that's set up on a farm. I'd been there a couple times with my family when I was younger, but this was my first time I'd gone alone with just friends. We were in high school and thought it'd be fun to walk around and just have a few laughs while we enjoyed the Halloween vibes it offered. The place was open late the whole week leading to Halloween, so we went on one of those weekday nights around 8 p.m. I guess we chose an odd day and time though, because most of the families had already left, and there were only a few groups of kids our age running around still. Regardless, we still had fun. We played some of the random games they had set up and messed around a bit, but then one of my friends said we should check out the corn maze. None of us hesitated to run in and try to get as lost as possible. That was until somehow we split into two groups. 3 of them ran off one way, and I was left with my buddy Micah. Seeing as it was a maze, there was no use in trying to chase after the others. We went our own way for a few minutes, then started trying to find our way out. During our 10 or so minutes that we spent walking around, we never heard or ran into any of the others from the group, which made us wonder how big the maze actually was. At some point, we were getting tired of it and really started trying to find the way out. Whenever there were multiple paths, we would split up and check if either were a dead end, then come back and go down together whichever we thought was best. But on one of these random crossroads, Micah didn't come back. I waited for a long time, at least 2 or 3 minutes without hearing or seeing him, until I heard footsteps coming from down the path. As I waited for Micah to reappear, something about the footsteps didn't seem right. A moment later, a large man came around the path and walked up to me. He was wearing farmer-type clothes, like overalls, a flannel shirt, and boots, looking like all the other employees at the fair. He said it was closing for the night, and that he would take me out of the maze. I told him my friends were in here as well, and he said that he'd already shown them out, which made everything else make sense now. I followed him, going around multiple turns and corners, but strangely, the sound of the fair started to get quieter and quieter, until I couldn't hear it at all. It was just me and this man walking through a dead silent corn maze. Then we reached a dead end. I stopped and watched the man pull aside the corn and start pushing his way through it, urging me to come through. I did as he said, walking through it and following closely behind him until the corn abruptly stopped and turned into an empty field. As I looked around, I realized that this was the other side of the cornfield, opposite of the town and fair. And right in front of me was a car parked in the grass with its engine running and headlights off. My breathing became shallow and my heart rate started increasing. All of a sudden, the man quickly turned around and tried to grab me. I was able to react fast enough, moving away and running back into the maze. As I sprinted back onto the path, I heard the man forcing his way through the corn again and following right behind me. I started going straight through all of it, just trying to get back to the fair where hopefully someone could help me. This seemed to work, as the man never caught up to me. When I made it out, my whole friend group was standing at the entrance waiting for me. It's not really clear what happened, but Micah said he came back for me and I was gone. None of them saw the man though, and almost didn't believe me until I called the cops. All they found were tire tracks in the grass. No car or man anywhere. I'm 19 years old, and this happened a year ago. I still live with my parents, and I'm an only child. For my whole life, we lived in the same house in a very average neighborhood, but last year after I finished high school, my parents chose to move us to a new place. It was a few hours away in a less city-like town. They talked about it a lot, so it was no surprise or anything. but moving away from where I was used to was very odd for me, especially with the house being so drastically different. It was still technically in a neighborhood, but it had a ton of land, and rather than the houses being right up next to each other, they were each separated by a few acres of forest. Anyway, a couple weeks after moving in, my parents went on their yearly business trip together, flying across the country and leaving me with the house. I was obviously old enough, but it was a bit unsettling to be in the new place alone for the first time. It was summer too, so I didn't have any school or anything. I was just spending all day at the house. The first day went by slowly, as I tried to keep myself entertained by YouTube and Netflix, but ran out of things to watch. On the second day though, I spent a little while sitting outside on the chairs we had set up on the porch, and it wasn't long before I noticed a man by the street. Our driveway was big, so the street wasn't exactly close to our house, but he was standing right next to the entrance of our driveway, kind of in the trees, and looking toward me. I lifted my hand and waved, thinking he was a neighbor, but the man immediately looked away as if he was trying to pretend like he wasn't looking at me. It was odd, but he walked away afterward. I waited for a few minutes to see if he'd come back, but then went inside. I didn't think on it too much, going about the rest of my day by playing video games and making a frozen meal for dinner. I stayed up later that night. I can't say the exact time, but it was likely close to 1 or 2 a.m. when I finally went upstairs and got in bed. I had trouble falling asleep, same as the night before, so I was laying with my eyes closed for almost an hour. It was just as I felt like I might be able to fall asleep that I heard something downstairs. A few footsteps walking onto the porch outside. I opened my eyes and listened carefully before there was a soft click, and then the long creak of the front door opening. I sat there in silence, terrified into a state of shock where I didn't know what to do. I heard the footsteps enter the house, then walk through the hallway downstairs. They were very slow and quiet, trying to keep their presence unknown. I got out of bed and moved over to the door, locking it, and then going to the corner of my room and hiding behind the bed frame. They continued to walk through the downstairs, barely making any noise. Then there was a long minute of silence before I heard the sound of the staircase creak, and then again, closer to the top of the steps. My heart was beating so fast as I stared at the bedroom door in horror when I saw the shadow move under it and stop right outside. They stood there for an entire minute, probably listening to see if I was in the room. Then they finally walked away, going down the hall and up to the master bedroom. I didn't hear the door open, so I assumed they did the same thing, standing outside the door and listening. Then he started walking back toward my room, but I saw the shadow move past my door, and then the footsteps quietly going down the stairs at a quickened pace. They went straight for the front door, leaving the house, and then it was silent again. I must have stayed in my room, completely still for 30 minutes, thinking it was a trap of some kind and that he was hiding in the house, waiting for me to make a sound. But when I finally got the courage to leave my room and walk downstairs, I saw the front door wide open and no person anywhere in the house. I called the police and my parents, but as you could assume, they didn't find much. They aren't sure how the person unlocked the front door, but we of course changed the locks and added a chain bolt as well. I also don't know if the person who broke in was the same person I'd seen watching me earlier that day, or if it was someone else. Their intentions are unknown, but my parents think that maybe when they came inside and saw that the master bedroom door was closed, the intruder may have thought that they were home and didn't want to risk going forward with whatever he planned to do while someone else was home. What the person was truly planning will likely never be known for sure. When I was 18, Me and two of my friends moved in together into an apartment. We all worked regular jobs while doing online school, and with the three of us combined, the rent was easily affordable. Over the following year though, one of them moved out, leaving just the two of us to pay the bill. It was still affordable, but much less than it used to be, and even had me stressing out a couple times. And after a few months, my other friend moved out as well. It wasn't their fault having to leave, but it still really sucked, and I was forced to find somewhere else to live on just my small paychecks. There weren't a lot of options within my budget, but I was willing to take anything as long as it was a roof over my head. Eventually, I found a listing for an apartment on the other side of town. From the pictures, it looked like a small building, only having 8 rooms, and it definitely was not very nice on the inside. Still, the price was okay with me, so I sent in a request to tour and went there later that night. I met the owner, Jackson, and he walked me through the room. It was really small and really not that great, but again, there wasn't much I could do about it. The following week, I moved in. Once I got used to it, the place wasn't actually too bad. Sure, it wasn't very clean and looked really old, but it had all the basic things I needed. The only thing that felt weird was this one door in the hallway. It was right across from my room, almost looking like it would be just another bedroom. But during the tour, Jackson said my place was actually connected to the neighbors, so we shared that door. He explained that it always stayed locked from both sides, and that I could just ignore it, assuming it was just like a wall. But sometimes I felt like it was a little weird if they could hear everything going on in my apartment. And on the flip side, I always felt like I had to be extra quiet so as to not disturb them. The door was clearly thin, so sound had to be going through easily. However, for the first week or so, I never heard anything from the other side. Like, not even a little bit of noise or anything. It wasn't until one night after working late, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a really loud thud come from the hallway. I walked over, thinking something might have fallen over in my room, but then I noticed a bit of light moving around under the door to the other apartment. It looked like maybe a phone flashlight or something. I listened for a little bit, not trying to be too creepy, but just wanting to know what was going on. After all, that was the first time I'd ever heard anything from their apartment. But after only a minute, the light turned off and no more sounds came from behind the door. I went back to the couch and stayed up for another hour before going to bed. Throughout the night, I occasionally woke up hearing thuds or soft footsteps coming from that door in the hallway. I never got up to check on it because I knew there was nothing to really check on, but it gave me an eerie feeling for some reason, knowing they were up the entire night doing something in the dark of their room. This went on for a few days, only hearing noises late at night when most people would be sleeping. I never heard anyone talking though, or really anything other than thuds and footsteps. But then one night, something was different. I woke up to a thud far louder than any of the others I'd heard. I immediately sat up in my bed with wide open eyes, staring at my door across the room. Something about that sound sent chills through me, making me feel like this was something I needed to check on. I slowly and quietly got out of my bed and walked over to my door, leaning against it and listening into the hallway. Nothing. It was completely silent now. I carefully opened the door, looking across the hall, and felt my body go numb. The other door was open. I hesitated, unsure what to do, but then I crept into the hallway and looked behind the partially open doorway. I almost didn't believe what I saw. It was a bedroom, slightly smaller than mine, but it was empty aside from a mattress on the ground. There were no doorways leading to anywhere else. It was just a single room with no way in or out except for the door in my apartment. I ran and got my phone, dialing 911 as I looked all around my apartment to make sure nobody was there. Luckily, whoever was in there had left. Police came and did their investigation, but strangely, Jackson never picked up his phone, and soon we found out that Jackson probably wasn't who he said he was. We never heard or saw from him again. As for the room, it's honestly just a puzzling situation. It could have been Jackson, or whoever he was, that was living in there and trying to not be noticed. Or it could have been someone else. Maybe they broke out and that's what the sounds were. To this day though, I've never gotten any updates on what the true story behind any of it was. It was the beginning of winter when I had to make a big change of location for work. There was no way around it due to my position, unless I quit, but I really didn't want to do that. Unfortunately though, they were making me move several states over to a place I'd never been to before. It was a small town a decent way outside of the city that just so happened to have a large warehouse that I'd be working at. With no real way to get there beforehand, I had to rent a place without ever seeing it in person. The options were minimal given the size of the town, so I wasn't very confident in my choice, but I tried to keep my hopes up. When the day came, I left my hometown and drove 2 days to the new place. When I first made it to the town and drove through the roads, I felt very out of place. I was always a city person, and this was the most small town looking town I'd ever been to. There were very few neighborhoods with newer houses, as most of them were very old 1900s looking homes. The neighborhood my place was in seemed to be a mix of these houses, which looked a bit strange, but at least my house was one of the somewhat newer ones. I parked on the side of the street and walked up the driveway, which had a shipping container in the middle that was delivered with all my stuff in it. I opened up the house key from an envelope and unlocked the front door, stepping inside for the first time. Seeing an empty house is never the best way to judge if it'll be good or not, but this place looked a lot worse than it did in the pictures. There were cracks running along the walls and water stains all over the ceiling, things that must have been photoshopped out of the pictures. The rooms were not very spacious either, but honestly, after seeing all the other houses, this one was probably one of the best in the town. Once I was done looking through the rooms, I went back to my car and got out the air mattress and a couple backpacks full of stuff. It was already really late, and I didn't want to do any big moving until the morning. I decided to set up the air mattress in the living room. I don't know, sleeping in an empty bedroom in an empty house made me uncomfortable, so I just stuck with the living room. I turned off all the lights and laid down. I was really tired, but I still had trouble getting comfortable. About 30 minutes went by of me just laying there and trying to sleep before a knock at the front door startled me up. I looked over at the door, then tapped my phone to check the time. 1 a.m. Nobody should be at the door this late. I got up and quietly went over, looking through the peephole. There were 2 men, both standing on the porch and looking at the door. It was dark, but neither of them had defining features. I stayed and watched them, not saying anything, and waiting for them to leave. They knocked again, showing no signs of leaving anytime soon. I wondered what they could possibly need at this time of night, and I really couldn't think of anything reasonable. Another 30 seconds passed, until one of them turned around and started to walk away, followed by the other. After they were gone, I sat back on the mattress and tried to figure out why they came here. I spent at least 15 minutes just laying down and thinking, but I guess I was more tired than I thought because I drifted asleep. When I woke up, it must have only been maybe half an hour later. I was still half asleep, but I heard a long, quiet creak come from across the house. I quickly got up and turned on the light. I didn't know if it was just the house creaking or something else, but I was already on edge. I walked down to the room at the other end of the house where I'd heard the sound from, but at first, nothing seemed off. It was just an empty room. That was until I saw a very small gap between the window frame. It was just slightly open. My stomach dropped as I closed and locked it. I had no idea if it was like that before or not. I didn't remember ever checking the windows. My mind was racing though, making me go through the house and check all the windows and doors. But as I went around the upstairs rooms, there was a single scuffed shoe print right in the middle of the hallway. Thankfully, there was no one in the house anymore, but it didn't take away the horror of it. Police came quickly after I called, confirming that it was very likely someone had come in that night through the window. The fact that one or two people had come in through the downstairs window and must have walked through the entire house to get upstairs, all happening while I was sleeping in the middle of an empty room, is a terrifying thought. You just have to wonder what they did when they saw me and what they were planning on doing. And did it have anything to do with the two men I'd seen just half an hour before? I still live in the same house, but I've never had any more strange encounters since that very first night. I was using Craigslist to find myself some outdoor furniture. I had just moved and gotten a backyard patio, so I was excited to spend time out there, but didn't want to overspend on it. On the website, there were a ton of people selling outdoor stuff, but most of them were really outdated or just gross and overused. I took my time, casually checking throughout the week until someone posted one for sale that I liked the look of. It was a simple 2-chair and 1-table setup, but it looked clean and was a decent price. I sent an email and waited. It only took a couple minutes for the owner to respond. His name was Jared, and he explained that the set was newly opened, but had a few scratches on it from shipping. After a quick back and forth, we agreed to meet the next day around 6 at his house. So come the next day, I drove over there. When I pulled up to the side of his house, the first thing I noticed was that all the lights were off inside. The only light that was on was the front porch light. The home itself, though, was actually really nice, looking like it was very expensive. I parked and got out, walking up to the front door and ringing the doorbell. I heard it ring from inside the house, but nothing followed it. No lights turned on, and no footsteps coming to the door. I looked through the little window on the porch, not trying to be creepy, but just trying to see if there was anyone even home. I saw what looked like a normal house, but no signs of anyone. The sound of my phone receiving a text made me jump back from the window. It was Jared, saying to come around through the fence into the backyard. Everything was just a little off about this, but it was patio furniture, so I guess it made sense to me at the time. I walked around the front of the house and over to the wooden fence gate, pushing it open and walking into the backyard. Jared came around the corner and waved at me, then showed me over to the furniture. I was actually really stunned at how nice the setup was. Everything looked perfect and was high quality. I sat on one of the chairs and walked around it, looking for any damages because I just couldn't believe he was selling these. But after less than a minute of looking, Jared started to rush me. His smile faded and he showed an impatient face, followed by asking me if I would take it or not. I would have taken it without any trouble, but the change in attitude started to make me notice some other strange things. The most notable being that the set was perfectly placed, having other decorations around it and everything, as if it was meant to be there. Even the table had coasters on it for drinks. It just didn't look like it was even for sale. I think he saw my change in emotions because he started becoming pushy with me, trying to get me to give him the cash and take the furniture. Now uncomfortable with the situation, I took a step back and said I would think about it and text him my decision tomorrow. He frowned and took a step toward me, followed by another, and with every step closer he came, I could see it more clearly in his eyes that he had bad intentions. I turned around and ran back to the front of the house, hearing his footsteps following close behind until I reached the gate. I sprinted to my car, and strangely, the man turned out of the gate and ran across the yard until he reached an intersecting road. I watched him get in a car across the road and speed off as I sat in shock and called 911. As you probably know by now, that wasn't his house or his furniture to sell. The owners were on vacation, and the man, who still remains unidentified, was trying to sell their belongings while they were gone. Thankfully, there were no signs of him breaking into the home, but they still aren't sure how he knew the family was on vacation. All I can say is that I'm glad I made it out when I did, because I don't think I would have gotten away unharmed if I had tried to leave even just a moment later. This happened 6 years ago. I was preparing to move into a house across the state and trying to get rid of anything that took up too much space. Craigslist was the only way I could think of to do this easily, as well as bring in a bit of extra cash to help me with the move. I posted about 10 separate listings of random things I was selling. Each item I was asking less than $20 for, just because I wanted them to go quickly. And for most of them, they did. I think only a couple were left by the end of the week, one of which was a workout bench with a set of weights. This was probably the last thing I wanted to haul into the moving truck and into the new place, so I really wanted it gone. I waited until just a few days before the moving date, before someone finally sent me an email. I opened it, and all they said was, "I can pick it up today." Nothing more. I sent a reply, asking what time they could come at. We ended up going back and forth over the course of an hour, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't find the interaction odd. He would only write a vague sentence or two per message, making it take forever to plan out the exchange. In most other situations, I would never give away my address, especially in such a weird conversation, but I was moving away in just a few days, so I didn't feel it mattered too much. I sat on my phone in the kitchen for a while, just waiting for the guy to arrive. 30 minutes went by with no call or text, until I heard a car pull up outside, and then footsteps coming up to the front door. I waited for the doorbell or a knock, but nothing came, so I went up and opened the door. He looked startled, like he wasn't expecting it, but he also wasn't doing anything. From the small glimpse I got while opening the door, it looked like he was just standing there, staring forward with his hands in his pockets.
"You're here for the workout stuff?"
I asked. He nodded, and I invited him inside and showed him to where the bench and weights were, then let him check out the stuff for himself. Except he didn't. He stood there and looked at it, but didn't do much else. I already knew after the emails that this guy was going to be quiet and probably shy or something, but something else was definitely off about this guy. We stood next to each other as I waited for him to say something or check out the bench. It was a really awkward minute, but then there was a knock at the front door. The guy's head whipped around and he looked at me with wide eyes, like he was gauging my reaction. Although my gut was telling me this was something horrible, I tried to play it cool. I started walking to the front door, and the guy followed close behind me. Right before I got to the hallway, he stopped me by grabbing my arm. I immediately pulled away and asked him what was going on, but he kept that same blank face and didn't say anything. There was another knock, and this time, the man instantly ran down the hallway and swung the door open, giving me enough time to turn around and run out the back door. I looked back and saw 3 more men entering my house. Luckily, they didn't chase me, and I was able to get to a neighbor's yard where I hid and called the police. While I waited, I saw movement in the windows of my house. It was unnerving to see that, especially knowing I could have been in there if I hadn't gotten out the back door. A whole 5 minutes passed before the movement stopped, and a couple minutes after that, the police showed up. To keep this from dragging on, the police didn't get much evidence from inside my house. The best they had was my description of the one man who I let in. The 4 intruders couldn't take much, at least, considering my house was mostly empty at this point in the moving process. What they would have done to me had I opened the door or stayed inside the house is unknown. I think it's unlikely that I would have gone unharmed, though. I've never opened Craigslist even once since then, and I encourage everyone else to do the same. I found a house on Craigslist that both me and my roommate were interested in renting. We didn't have a huge pool of money at the time, so taking up low rent offers on Craigslist was just about the best we could do right out of college. We sent in a quick request to tour the place and included both of our phone numbers as well. A few hours later, I got a call from the owner, Kim, who said he could have us tour the place tomorrow, but had other tours scheduled for the rest of the week. My roommate worked that day, but knowing he had other people lined up meant we had to see the place soon or risk losing it. So we both agreed that I would go see the house and just take pictures of it for my roommate to look at when he got off work. This wasn't ideal, but it was the best we could think of. When I got to the house on the following day, I was kind of disappointed at first glance. It was far from other houses, down a pretty beat-up road, and the house itself did not look well taken care of. The outside had overgrown bushes and grass all around it. I parked in the driveway and got out to get a better view, but there wasn't much else to see. I stood there in the driveway for a second, debating if I wanted to flake on the owner and pretend like I couldn't make it. It sounds wrong, but I could already tell this wasn't going to be the place for us. Just before getting back into my car, a man called out to me. He came out of the front door and greeted me, and now I knew I was too far in. Kim seemed really excited to show me the place, so I went along with it. We went in through the front, and again, at first glance, the inside was really disappointing. It was very old and even looked kind of run down. As we walked through the house, I noticed more and more things that just didn't look right. The entire place was so worn down, I couldn't see how this would possibly be livable. And I was positive these were not the pictures he had posted on Craigslist. I asked if he planned any repairs or anything, and he started running through a list of things he had planned. He basically named every part of the house, which made it obvious he was making impossible promises. After touring the whole first floor, he started walking me up to the second floor. When we got up to the hallway, all I could focus on was this one door in the far back that had a padlock on it. Then I looked down at the dusty hardwood floor and saw multiple shoe prints of different sizes, but all of them went to a single room, yet none of them were coming out of the room. Even if I was missing some shoe prints exiting, I still knew that if they were from people touring the house, they would have gone to all of the rooms, not just the one. This all came to thought within a few seconds of being upstairs, and my heart started beating faster as I got nervous. Kim walked down the hallway, passing by one of the rooms and going straight to the one where all the shoe prints led to. I stopped and stared at him as he opened the door and urged me to come look. He looked at me for a second, but then recognized my nervous face and said for me to come over, this time like he was demanding it. My adrenaline started pumping, getting me to break from the shock and run back down the stairs straight to my car. I pulled out and drove off as the man came chasing me down the driveway. I called 911 as soon as possible, but when they got there, the house was empty. Nobody was inside. However, the room with all the shoe prints leading to it had signs of recent activity, showing that there were at least 2 separate people being in there. And the room with the padlock had a ton of garbage, like food wrappers and old blankets. The house was abandoned 8 years ago, and these people seemed to have been living there for a while. I don't know what their plan was to do to me, but it was most likely a setup for an ambush. What scares me is that they weren't trying to sell me anything that day, so there wouldn't be reason to believe I had a bunch of cash on me. And that makes me question what ambushing me would have been for.
I'm an avid gamer with a full-time job, so I'm sure many can empathize with the dilemma I faced years ago in attaining a new PlayStation 5. Stocks were low, and getting one was nearly impossible. I didn't have time to poach sales on websites or scour stores in person for the very limited time they became available. In the weeks leading up to Black Friday, my brother's workplace received a shipment of PS5s, and I begged him to let me reserve one. Although it took some convincing, a manager allowed him to keep one, assuming I paid for it that same day, and also kept it a secret from the other employees, lest they ask for the same treatment. I was ecstatic and couldn't thank him enough. When that Friday came, I headed to the store and purchased the console with the intention of rushing home, setting it up, and playing the new Call of Duty. As I arrived, however, I found my brother in a heated argument with another employee. The man was squaring up in his face, flailing his arms erratically. I went over to assess the situation. That's when the hostile guy turned on me, berating me for being special and saying how I shouldn't even own a PlayStation as a woman. Evidently, our hidden transaction was no longer a secret. My brother tried to guide me away from the raging coworker, yet he followed, shouting after us on the verge of angry tears. It wasn't until a manager intervened that we escaped him. My brother apologized, telling me how this man has been getting into a lot of trouble recently and blew up once he caught my brother sneaking a console away. I wasn't the sort to hold grudges, so I shrugged it off, paid for the PlayStation, and went on my way. Following a night of gaming, I woke up to a text from my brother. He told me that the upper management sacked the guy for flipping out on other employees after the incident. I felt bad, but all my brother was concerned about was how this now former employee had threatened the pair of us. I thought it was a spur-of-the-moment anger, yet my brother insisted that this guy was having a full-on meltdown and quite possibly dangerous. I just told him not to worry. That Saturday at work dragged on. I couldn't wait to get back home and start the weekend. As soon as I could, I left my workplace and walked to my car, only to be stopped in my tracks by someone shouting behind me. I turned quickly, both irritated and startled to be called so abruptly. My heart jumped a little when I found myself face to face with the man from my brother's store. "You remember me?" he asked with the faintest shred of remorse. His appearance was unkempt and exhausted, and at that point, I understood my brother's warning. How did this guy find me? Why would he intimidate me over a gaming console? I responded with a mere nod, probably failing to hide my nerves. The man then started what felt like a practice apology. He told me his wife had just left him, and he was trying to win his kid's favor. I listened in silence as he explained how he wanted a PlayStation for his boy, yet his voice carried no emotion. Call me a jerk, but my inner kid wasn't about to give up my console. I told him that I didn't keep it for myself, that it was a gift for my little cousin, and I couldn't break his heart by taking it away. He just grunted in response and stared at me. The silence exceeded awkwardness and became uncomfortable. Feeling threatened, I got in my car and left with him still standing there, blankly watching me drive away. Once home, I texted my brother immediately about the encounter, and not a minute passed before he replied and told me that the guy never had a wife nor any kids. I was still reading the text when a sudden knock came from the rear of my apartment. It wasn't even subtle. The guy was at my house, screaming at the top of his lungs and trying to break down the back door. I had no idea how he got my address, though he likely followed me. For whatever good it did, I ran to the back and threw my body against the doorframe, trying to barricade the entrance while dialing 911. "You lied!" he growled from the opposite side, and I just pleaded in response, telling him that he could have the PlayStation if he would just go away. We argued back and forth for what seemed like hours until my brother arrived with the police in tow. They arrested the man while he spat at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. As they cuffed him, they saw that his fingernails were bloody from clawing at the door. I had never seen someone act so insane. His father later contacted us to apologize profusely, explaining that his son was mentally unwell and receiving treatment. We were glad for the news, but really didn't want any involvement. The PlayStation 5 is still in my living room, yet it hasn't been in frequent use as my work schedule only increases by demand. I often question if it was worth all the drama, and if maybe our parents were right. Video games only encourages violence. Ever since I had my now 6-year-old son, Jason, I've felt on constant edge being a new mother. A lot of moms would agree that a certain kind of defense mechanism overrides your system as soon as you have a child. I always found this newly discovered protective strength to be necessary, but rather excessive, until somebody challenged this precaution. Last November, me and my sister went shopping on Black Friday. I brought Jason along and she had her teenage daughter with us. We regularly did our Christmas shopping together, and it was usually a big event to us. We were always camping out in the stores and trying to be the first in through the doors. It was more of a fun sport than a real shopping haul, but I digress. This was the first year Jason could attend the traditional outing, because I feared losing him in the crowds when he was younger. I had him put on his brightest green shirt so he'd be easy to spot, and his niece promised me that she would be my second pair of eyes, which further put me at ease. My sister was in her competitive spirits and suggested we wait near the doors of a large retail outlet. It was only 6:30 when we arrived, and the store wouldn't open for some time, but being early was the intention. Despite a horde forming, it wasn't as crowded yet. A few people were scattered around, engrossed in the deals displayed in the store windows. The only person that didn't seem eager for the shop to open was a short man with a gray beard, standing a few meters from us. He was wearing a puffer jacket and rolled an lit cigarette calmly between his lips. This man seemed to be patiently minding his own business, yet every few seconds I caught him looking in our direction, and it made me feel slightly nervous. Soon, employees began showing up, and by that time, the place was packed with shoppers hovering outside the doors. When they opened and the rush of bodies crashed through the entrance, the four of us were huddled together and joined the wave. Once inside, everyone began mindlessly grabbing at items to pile into their carts. But we immediately made our way to the electronics. Our target was the phone section, and in the blind pursuit, my niece rushed ahead while pulling Jason by his hand. I didn't worry much until me and my sister reached the electronics after a slight delay in movement, and we found my niece looking through the iPhones with my son nowhere in sight. Instinctively, I rushed over and began to yell his name, scanning for him in the surrounding area. When Jason failed to appear, I turned to my niece for answers. My body went cold, and I shouted at her more aggressively than I had intended to, which made her burst into tears. It all happened so fast. Not even a split second after we realized we lost him, the man that was standing outside looking at us approached. He wasn't wearing his puffer jacket anymore, and instead, he wore a bright green shirt nearly identical to the one my son was wearing, if not for the obvious size difference. "Here I am." He almost giggled. The stoic demeanor that he previously carried was completely altered, and he acted disturbingly childlike as he danced around on the spot. My sister began shouting at him, while me and my niece continued to scour the area in desperation. There were so many things going on around us, and I couldn't focus on this deranged individual with my son missing. Even so, I listened involuntarily to his altercation with my sister while I shoved past people clustered by the phone booths. "It's me, Jason!" The man laughed, and my sister in response yelled for security. I couldn't even properly acknowledge the anger I felt, but luckily, it subdued before it reached the surface because Jason appeared right at my side and tugged on my arm. He looked worried to see his mom in such a state, and his little face portrayed only confusion. He wasn't harmed or distressed. As one can imagine, I clung to him after that, and although my sister had a lot to say to the creepy man, I just focused on silently composing myself. The things I would have said are just too vile to speak of. The security physically escorted the man away while he resisted their efforts. He cackled and coughed, his mouth foaming with saliva, the spitting image of a psychopath. Naturally, this encounter completely ruined the day for us. I try not to think about what could have happened or why it happened, but I'll never be able to go out into crowded areas without being reminded of how dangerously unhinged some people can be. I used to work as a security guard at a large mall. It was my first job straight out of high school, and it got boring fast, because most of it entailed sitting behind a wall of screens, watching shoppers go about their business. Days were long and tedious, but the most dreadful time of the year was nearing the holiday season. When I received the work schedule for 1 year, I didn't know whether to be excited or irritated. I was posted during Black Friday. Although it was only my second year at this job, I already knew the headache that accompanied the Black Friday sales. People shoving over one another for items that are marked down to the same discount available every Tuesday. During the previous year, I had the night shift after Black Friday, and even though the scene I walked into that night was like something out of an apocalyptic movie, it didn't hold a match to being clocked in when those doors opened to degenerates who had forgotten every ounce of human decency in the pursuit of scoring some deals. That morning, I was mentally getting ready to face anything and everything. After grabbing an energy drink from the food court, I thought I was prepared for it all, until I reached my desk in the control room. There was a note on the keyboard in front of the CCTV screens, and it simply read, "In the dark, stay inside." I had no idea what it could mean, and because I couldn't make anything of it, I just tossed the note away. From the second the mall opened, there wasn't a dull moment. I was running around like a headless chicken, trying to desperately maintain order and safety among shoppers. There were 10 guards on duty, and we all had our hands full. Countless reports of unrest echoed through the mall, and it was hard to keep track of every complaint. The walkie-talkie strapped to my vest was constantly buzzing when one of my colleagues radioed in about something that immediately drew my attention. 4 men were causing trouble at the far end of a parking lot. Allegedly, they were robbing people at knife point on the 3rd floor parkade. Police had already been notified, but as security, we still had to intervene in an attempt to remove bystanders from any immediate danger. In the midst of the chaos, I began making my way to the 3rd floor, and seeing as I was passing near the CCTV room anyway, I decided to quickly have a look at the cameras to gauge what I was about to walk into. As I unlocked and swung open the door to the tiny security room, I nearly bumped into someone standing there facing the computer screens. Only a few employees had keys to this door, and I didn't recognize this person as one of them. It was a guy dressed in a Christmas suit. When he heard me enter, he turned and faced me. His eyes were hidden by a pair of sunglasses, and his heavy breathing filled the quiet air. Normally, I never froze up, yet I found myself paralyzed by a mixture of confusion and fear. I was about to question him when he abruptly stepped forward and placed his face mere inches from mine. "You got my note." He flashed a toothy smile. His teeth were cosmetically filed and sharpened to a resembling jawline of a shark. His body twitched as he stood there, and before I could respond, the power abruptly tripped, leaving us in complete darkness. I quickly outstretched my arms, ready to defend myself, as the guy threw himself at me. He was scrawny but strong, as he shoved me to the side and ran out the door. His escape was already secured by the time the lights flickered back on. Despite those men outside being the priority, I couldn't leave the room after the obvious security breach. I locked the door and reported the incident over my radio, giving a quick description of the man while trying to restore the camera footage. When the screams came to life, they focused on one image. It was of 5 men, all dressed in Christmas suits and sunglasses, staring in the direction of the camera lens with clear intimidation, almost like they were posing to be seen. The creepiest part of it all was how the image vanished when I tried to show it to anyone else. Even the brightest tech guys on our team couldn't restore it, and with everything considered, I couldn't help but feel like it was all aimed at me. Supposedly, the police caught 2 of the men, but there were no follow-up reports that came back to us. I still worked as a guard for the following 2 years after, and I faced many more dangerous incidents. However, the scariest moments would occur when I was alone in the CCTV room, and the screens would momentarily glitch into an image of the 5 men, taunting me to no end.